All right, welcome to another episode of Studio 118. I'm Reuben. This is Bunjee.
Hello.
Yes, welcome to Studio 118 again. Brought to you by Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. Come, let us reason. God tells us to do, and that's what we're here exactly to do. We want to reason through the scriptures, delve into tough topics, theological topics, cultural topics, and we want to help you, the viewer, get a good handle on these topics so you can have some fruitful conversations with the people around you. So welcome if you're tuning in. We're live on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in there. We're also live on Austin Cable Access Channel 11. So if you're tuned in on the tubes, thank you for doing that. Just as a reminder, we do have a Q&A portion after our discussion today, which is a special spooky discussion. We'll get into that right now. But our Q&A will happen afterwards. So if you have any questions related to today's topic, talking about Halloween and some conspiracy theories, send in your questions. They're on YouTube live chat. We also take questions via email. You can email outreach@calvarysouthaustin.com. That's outreach@calvarysouthaustin.com. Or if you'd like to call in your question, you can do so. You can reach us at 512-576-5433. That's 512-576-5433. And for 3 easy payments, I'm kidding, you can send in your questions. We'll queue it up, and they'll be ready for us after our discussion. And feel free to share the streaming link on all your social media platforms. We want to, to get the word out, get people involved in our conversation tonight. So thank you for joining us. And also just want to remind you, we're here at Calvary South Austin, here in Austin, Texas. And just as a reminder, we have opened our doors on Sunday mornings and on Wednesday evenings. So we want you to come join us for face-to-face fellowship. We're taking all the necessary safety measures, make sure people are staying socially distant, making sure everything's clean. And we just want our body of believers to be a part of the fellowship here. So we have opened our doors, Calvary South Austin. And so come and join us Sunday mornings at 9:15 and 11:15 a.m. And then on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. We do have live stream links available for those that are still in the high-risk category. You can still catch the sermons being taught. And that'll happen on Sunday mornings at 11:15 a.m. and then on Wednesday evenings at 7.
So you can catch the sermon without catching corona.
Yes,
is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's a good slogan. Catch the sermon without catching COVID. Somebody trademarked that. You guys on it? All right, thanks. So, lastly, I just want to start getting into. We want to jump right in because we got some juicy topics to go through, and we're talking about Halloween, and then some other related topics about some conspiracy theories that always surround this spooky topic of Halloween. But I did want to let you guys know we have a little bit of a different format that we're going to be in dialogue. And so we've agreed to do a 90-minute portion, but 2 minutes each. And I think we're just going to talk over each other during that whole time, right? I think that was shown to be beneficial last time I heard.
I think that's the best way to communicate.
Wrong. Wrong, you're wrong.
I need a moderator to defend me right now. If I could get someone,
All right. No, we're just going to have a discussion. So thank you guys for joining us. We're talking about Halloween. And so, let's jump right into it, Bunjee. Halloween origins.
Free candy.
Free candy. That's all we want, right?
That's all it's about, right?
I think that's what it is. So we're in our entrance. We have free candy for you guys. Come join us. But Halloween, there's probably viewers out there that when they hear just the word Halloween, right, it just sparks up images of spooky characters or something dark and mysterious and scary. But for others, like you mentioned, it's probably just a time of candy, time of fun, dressing up. And let's bring some reason in here. Let's bring a little bit of history and just kind of get a little background as to, what is Halloween? Why do we even celebrate it? Where did it come from? That kind of stuff. What are the origins of Halloween, right?
Well, I think, if we consider how did the church begin to incorporate this celebration, because even ourselves here at Calvary South Austin, every year we engage in what we call the Fall Fiesta, which it's a carnival. It's, unfortunately we're not going to do it this year just because of it's 2020 and everything's insane. Yes. But hopefully if the Lord does tarry, then we'll pick it back up hopefully next year. But
that's our Tex-Mex spin, by the way.
That is, yeah. That's correct. Yes, it is Fall Fiesta because we're in Austin. But so when we consider this this modern practice, of having, say, like a fall fiesta, a church carnival, or just going door to door and kids dressing up and going around knocking on doors for candy, or carving out a jack-o'-lantern, or these sorts of things, they all find their history. We find the incorporation of these things in the Catholic Church. All the way back to, say, the 7th century, right? You've pointed out here in my notes that Pope Boniface,
cool name.
the fourth, there was at least 4 of those guys.
Boniface. Look at that guy.
So there he is.
Not a Boniface.
Nice fish hat.
No bueno face.
So, he, according to the information that I have, he dedicated the Roman pantheon to the Virgin Mary and Christian martyrs as part of this celebration. I don't know how that ties in. I don't know. To me, it's like it starts even before that. But considering how the Roman Catholic Church began to incorporate a previous pagan celebration, we can just talk about that for a moment here. I think the 9th century?
Yep.
When Pope Gregory IV moved this celebration, which was a celebration of the Virgin Mary and the Christian martyrs. He moved it to
November,
to November, and then finally it became All Hallows Day on the first day of November, and that being All Hallows Eve on the day before, or Halloween.
Yeah. So October 31st is All Hallows Eve. So AKA All Saints Day. My understanding is that they set aside this All Saints Day, and then there's All Souls Day to commemorate and to remember Christian martyrs, important Christian martyrs that were already, being memorialized. And then even November 2nd was deemed as All Souls Day.
Right.
And they said, you know what, everybody, let's just pray for everyone, right? Especially those that are in purgatory. And we say special prayers for those that have passed and are in purgatory, supposedly, so that we can, in hopes of getting them out of purgatory quicker, right?
Not that we believe in purgatory, but as part of their theology, they've got all these half-good people that are
in between,
trying to get out, and so when you consider how they incorporate this celebration in focusing on those who are deceased, focusing on the potential of the celebration of the saints who were martyred, I don't know that really explains why kids dress up like little devils now.
Doesn't it?
No, I just don't think so. I think they did incorporate some practices that are kind of reflective of this, though I don't think that little Roman Catholic kids were going around dressed up like devils and demons, right? Yeah. So where does that come from?
Yeah, so I guess going back to the true origins of Halloween, right, is where did these ideas even come from? So you mentioned jack-o'-lantern, dressing up, going door to door. Those are kind of 3 of the main ones that people would associate, right? And there, my understanding is that it goes way back into these kind of mystery religions, namely the Druids and also the Celtics.
Not to be confused with the Celtics.
Yeah, they're a bunch of losers. They just lost. Nobody cares about them.
Nobody cares.
Anyways, so Druids and Celtics, I guess, kind of took whatever the Druids were spilling out. But, a lot of these mystery religions really based their important holidays around like the changing of the seasons, right? So when when there's a winter solstice, there's the autumn solstice, and whenever they saw that these seasons were starting to change, they kind of put their supernatural spin on it and said, you know what, there's a supernatural element here where we believe that, especially on October 31st, they believe that the dimension or the connection between the realm of the spirits versus the realm of humans, that this veil was kind of at its thinnest.
Right.
And there was potential crossover where the spirits can now enter into the dimension of humans.
Yes.
And pester them or
Right.
get their attention somehow.
Yeah, exactly right. Halloween, or what was known by the Druids and even the Celts as Samhain.
Yeah.
Right.
Not Samhain.
Not Samhain, though. That's what it appears to be. I think it was back in the late '80s when I used to rock a band called Samhain. It was Glenn Danzig. And he had a little side project that was called Samhain, but in my youthful ignorance, I just thought it was Sam Hain.
You didn't do Hooked on Phonics?
I did not. I did not do Hooked on Phonics. But this was named after this celebration. Yeah. When it was believed, by the Druids and by the Celts that these spirits, had a easier portal into into Earth's atmosphere, and so you could potentially have demons, walking around with you. So the idea is dress up like a zombie so you don't get eaten by the zombies, right?
Yeah.
So classic Walking Dead, idea.
It's clever. It works.
If the demons are going to be rampant tonight on Halloween, then let's all look like demons, and so they'll leave us alone.
Those
right?
are some dumb demons. Are you? It kind of looks like it.
You
Yeah.
just look like us. Yeah.
Is that just a white sheet? That's what I look like? Man. So there was this crossover between the supernatural world and the physical reality. And then as this picture is showing here, there's a bonfire going on, which is supposed to,
And what's the actual terminology for bonfire?
Oh, I don't know.
Bonfire.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was building up these bone fires.
I've been making my fires wrong this whole time.
Oh yeah, you got to use real bone.
Real bone with marrow.
Yes.
That's what actually kindles the fire.
That's right.
So, yeah, bonfires were, a way of appeasing these spirits, and of course that's where this idea of just regular villagers dressing up, either to confuse the spirits, or here's where this element of trick or treat comes around. If you wanted to go play a prank on your neighbor, you would dress up as a ghoul or some sort of spirit, and then go play a prank at their house, right? So there's a little bit of element of trick or treat in there as well, and dressing up.
Yep. Which I was happy to incorporate when I was a kid.
Yeah. You play pranks?
Oh yeah, we terrorized the neighborhood. Yeah, it was horrible.
What are the statutes of limitations on that?
Yeah.
Anyways,
we were not good kids,
to say the least. So, yeah, you have dressing up, trick or treat, going door to door and all this, and then also this issue of jack-o'-lantern. Mm-hmm. There's this legend of Irish Jack, who was not allowed into heaven or hell, and he was just basically doomed to walk the earth, to roam the earth, and he needed, I think at first it was like a candle, but then as the story kind of gets embellished, it turned into a pumpkin, and so you could put a candle inside a pumpkin and lights better. There's the jack-o'-lantern there, right? And a lot of these customs and traditions, start spreading out throughout that time period, and they get carried forward from generation to generation. And, now you have the church getting involved and perhaps trying, it's not really clear, perhaps trying to counter these festivals, these celebrations from the pagan religions. So they might try to counter it, or maybe they just try to redeem it somehow, but still incorporate some of those customs, right? So that's not entirely clear. By the way, Halloween's one of those holidays where it's not entirely clear, what the true origins are, that's for sure, but so you're still trying to kind of connect the dots as best as you can. So, but either way, yeah, these customs, they start getting carried forward from generation to generation. At least the modern celebration of Halloween, my understanding is also, it didn't really get popular until mid 1900s, when there was, this influx of Irish immigrants who, that's really around the area where it started.
Right.
That's where it grew. That's where it flourished. And they brought their customs, obviously, their traditions, and they started incorporating that. And in America, this thing just spreads like wildfire. So a lot of those, they just turn into societal customs and traditions. They're fun things, and they start getting commercialized and whatnot.
And the Protestant church was very opposed to it, right? So the Protestant church really took a stand against it there in the beginnings. And so then this has left many churches with the question of can a Christian family celebrate Halloween?
Yes.
Can a Christian parent dress up their kids and send them out trick or treating? Or is this going to keep someone from heaven? Right?
Yep.
And this is for me, this is one of those things where I just encourage every Christian parent to make a prayerful decision, and then just to believe the conviction that God has given them, and then not impose that conviction on other parents, right? Some parents are going to feel a conviction that this is not good for their family. Other Christian parents are going to feel like this isn't a big deal. It's just make believe and pretend and free candy, right?
Yeah.
So I mean it's one of those things where in my opinion it's not something to divide over. I don't think the church should divide over this. I think that we should just give see this as one of these gray areas that somebody could engage in the celebration without embracing the pagan aspect of it. I think the same thing is true of Christmas and Easter, and you see pagan elements in all of the holidays, right? They're holy days. And each one of them have practices that can find roots in paganism, right? Yeah. Are we just going to automatically jump to the conclusion that anyone who engages in this practice is automatically embracing the pagan element of it? Yeah. Or can it be redeemed? Can God take all things and use it for His own glory, right?
Yeah. So that brings up an interesting point, right? So let me throw this at you. So, because some people would argue, right? Well, just like let's say the practice of like yoga, where it seems to me that you can't separate the spiritual aspect from just the physical practice of exercise, right? Could this be the case with Halloween, where the pagan customs are so imbued in that holiday that it can't be redeemed?
Yeah, I think that yoga presents a little bit different, and we maybe do a whole show on this, right? Yeah. It would be worth the time, but yoga has an aspect of it that like could somebody stretch and not be worshiping? So each yoga pose is designed as an act of worship to the God that it's designed for, right? So the original initial design of yoga is that each pose is an act of worship to this deity, right? And so can a Christian be in that pose and not be intending worship for that deity? And I think, I think that's very possible that they could do that, right? The other aspect is that yoga is actually designed to slowly tear ligaments apart, for the purpose of transitioning into your next life form, because it's all rooted. It's all rooted in reincarnation and the idea that you're after this life form, you're going to enter into a new life form. So rather than experiencing all the pain of that, in that time period between this life form and the next life form, rather than experiencing all the pain in that one moment, you slowly tear your body apart, through these, extreme stretches that slowly but surely tear your ligaments apart. You don't want to stretch your ligaments. And yet a lot of yoga poses, do stretch ligaments, and that's why, you have like old yogis walking around, knees popping out of joint, and their ligaments aren't working right anymore, right? So, should you tear your body apart slowly but surely, in the practice of preparing for reincarnation?
To each his own?
Absolutely not. I would suggest that there's better stretches than that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that yoga is kind of I don't think that you can pull yoga into that conversation, because there's nuances that make it apples and oranges, right?
Sure.
But can a Christian have a Christmas tree? though the origin of the Christmas tree kind of has a tie to a phallic, symbol from some sort of pagan practice, right? If one Christian says I can't have a Christmas tree in my house and worship Jesus, and another Christian says I can have a Christmas tree in my house and I can worship Jesus at the same time, I would just say, well, just be true to the conviction that you have and don't judge the one who has a different conviction. So.
Yeah. Good answer. So, and also, the way I think about it also is that wherever the Bible is not 100% clear, right? It's clear in a lot of areas. But here's where I default into, there are biblical principles still, right? So just because the Bible doesn't say Halloween doesn't mean that you're free and clear, that you get to do whatever you want.
Right.
There are still biblical principles that we should be aware of and really live by.
Right.
And that'll help still guide us into making a wise decision in whatever case, whatever holiday you think you might be violating your faith. And just like one off the top of my head is like where the scriptures call us to concentrate on those things that are good, that are wholesome,
right.
essentially, right? And to not engage in other practices or don't go seeking out things that are dark in nature and that kind of stuff, right? So There's still biblical principles out there. It's just for each person to go and do that homework for themselves and to become a wise steward, a good steward of the Word of God, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think right on. Everybody is going to have their conviction, but have that conviction, live by it, and then don't try to impose it.
When I was a kid, my mom, staunch believer, very committed to Christ. My dad, very committed to the Democratic Party. And they always had the debates about whether they should dress us up on Halloween and these sorts of things. And so I remember one year my parents dressed me up as Jimmy Carter.
Oh, I thought you were going to say JFK.
So I was Jimmy Carter one year for Christmas,
Yes. So I won't count.
But what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And, is God displeased, that my parents dressed me up as, a president of the United States, right? So it depends on how he feels about Jimmy Carter, but
nice.
So maybe not. I can't know at this point in time. But,
nice.
But can a Christian engage in like Wicca on Halloween?
Yeah. So yeah.
Can a Christian engage in necromancy on Halloween? Clearly not. Now, these are things that it's a no-brainer because the Bible's very clear.
Yeah.
Can a parent dress up a child in an innocent sort of costume, right? Like I have a hard time believing that you can glorify God while dressing your child up like a demon, right? I have a hard time believing that, right? But can a parent dress up their child as a Bible character or a superhero or these sorts of things? I personally, I don't see a problem with it, but if somebody said to me that they have a conviction that this is bad and there's no way that they're not glorifying Satan in all of this, then I would just say, don't do it then.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it.
Right.
But you also don't need to judge others who don't have the same conviction.
Yeah. Yep, good point.
Yep.
So yeah, you brought up, you referenced Wicca, right? And so that brings up this notion of another aspect where when people think of Halloween, they really tie in witchcraft, Wicca, also Satanism, right? So that also delves into, are there spooky things going on during Halloween night, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just talk a little bit about, witchcraft and Satanism. Is there, what are these? And then also, is there anything, do they really consider Halloween as a special day, that kind of thing? And I guess, I can kind of kick it off. And, witchcraft and Wicca and these things, they really just fall under this general umbrella of the occult. And if you're not familiar with that word occult, it really is a word that simply means hidden, secret, and mysterious. So think of these movements, these religions and worldviews, Wicca and Satanism and all these kinds of deals where they are kind of these mystery religions where they believe they have some sort of mysterious or hidden kind of beliefs that only a few are privileged to know about. You got to be in the in crowd. And a lot of these really do focus around supernatural, so beliefs about the supernatural, and really are kind of pushing against Christianity, really, monotheism, that kind of stuff. So they really do try to push against those beliefs and say, hey, we're our own thing. We're gonna reject what monotheism and Christianity have to offer. And really, from my understanding, is a lot of the times they just wind up worshiping nature or themselves.
Right.
And Wicca being one of those things. Wicca, from my research at least, I found it's really more of a modern movement, where there was this thing known as witchcraft, let's say in the 1600s or something like that. But really what we see today in this modern witchcraft movement in Wicca is more like an eco-paganism, where they really want to just take care of Mother Nature, Mother Earth.
How dare you?
How dare I? And so that's what it's really turned into. It's not really that they believe in this spiritual reality per se. A lot of them would really reject that today, but it's more about how can I take care of Mother Earth.
Yeah, most Satanists are just atheists who reject the idea that Satan exists.
Yeah.
But then they go with this title Satanist, which is intriguing to me.
Yeah, I saw that, and I saw where they really just hold up the character of Satan as a symbol of rebellion.
Yes.
Right? So he represents this rebellion in the world, but they want to attach themselves to it. That's the thing. And I think you're more familiar with this, where I think it was Anton LaVey wrote the Bible for Satanism, the Satan Bible, I think it was called, or Satanism Bible. And what is their core doctrine is do what thou wilt.
So you're talking about the Book of the Law,
the Book of the Law,
which was written by Aleister Crowley.
Oh, it's Crowley?
Yeah, so you're right that there is a book by Anton LaVey, the Satanic Bible, but the Do What Thou Wilt Shall Be the Whole of the Law is actually found in Aleister Crowley's work, which is the Book of the Law, which was, according to his own testimony, was given to him by a demon. So he channeled a demon and wrote this work known as the Book of the Law. And it's interesting that the Do What Thou Wilt Shall Be the Whole of the Law is it's a philosophy, a satanic philosophy, which is found in almost all secular music. Almost all secular music is basically promoting this do what thou wilt concept, and which is very interesting in and of itself. When you consider the difference between Christian worship music and secular music, which ends up being worship music, but just to, basically Satan or self, right? Because, I would just point out that, Satan doesn't need us to worship him. He just wants you to worship yourself, because if he can get you to just worship yourself, then, that's good enough for him. Yeah. So do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is, hey, do whatever you want to do. Yeah. Right. And then it's qualified under love. Right, but then there's no real definition of what love is, right? Yeah. And by the way, what's love got to do with it?
I just heard it was a secondhand emotion. So yeah, I definitely saw that and in Satanism apparently, talking about is Halloween a major aspect? From what I found, it's not really. In fact, in Satanism, each individual's birthday is really, and that makes sense. That's the most important day for them. Is when you're worshiping self, then. When you believe that you are your own God, you are the final arbiter, then yeah, it makes sense to worship your own birthday. So that's Satanism. So it really, but it does have, like you mentioned, there. From what I saw is that when Aleister Crowley came out and there was this big push, kind of a more publicity push. A lot of people started, tuning into his writings, and then came on Anton LaVey, who really did get into a little bit of the mainstream culture there, and his belief system started getting picked up there. And so you do see this cultural influence, like what you were mentioning, where I think that's just our natural disposition. When you make self, I mean, that's a message that really just appeals to anybody. That's our natural disposition as sinners, right? As Christians, we believe we're tainted from the moment of conception. We have the stain of original sin on our lives. Yeah. And that's just our natural disposition. We want to worship self. And so when this message comes along, starts appealing to people, no wonder it's got a stranglehold on society, on culture as a whole, right? And we start seeing this in the arts especially. So that totally makes sense.
So do what thou wilt. In its modern form is just look within your heart. Yes. And do whatever your heart tells you to do, right? Classic. I mean, it's the same thing, right? Yeah. It's just, that's the way it's put in today's, terminology is, what does your heart tell you to do? Do that, right? Yeah. Well, that's just do what thou wilt, dressed up, a little bit nicer.
Yeah, a little bit nicer. And so, yeah, Satanism, I really didn't see any much any real connection, as far as like, do they...
As far as Halloween goes.
As far as Halloween goes, right?
Right. But it is still, I mean, we would call it a high holy day, in the church. But as far as like, say with like
how much priority
the Wicca religions or the even going back to like say the Celts and the Druids and their magical beliefs, Samhain or Halloween is hailed as one of these very important days, right? And so with that, like I remember when I was a kid, my mom being a very staunch Christian who was very opposed to Halloween and the practice of it, was constantly feeding me the if you go trick or treating, you're going to get kidnapped and killed and sacrificed to Satan.
And you were, right?
Well, several times.
Several times.
But that was something that was a rumor that went around all over the place when I was a kid. Yeah. That the witches are out there, the Satan worshipers are out there looking to kidnap kids and use them in their sacrificial services to Satan, right?
Ours was just beware of the razor blade in the apple or in the candy. That was it. Or some needle in your candy bag or something. Man, that's hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah. So, being that it was a very, at least back in the 80s, there was a very, there was a belief that Halloween was being used by devil worshippers as a night to sacrifice kids. Yep. Is there any evidence for that?
Not that I saw. I mean, what I did see was that obviously there's going to be psychos. There's going to be lunatics that they're just not right in the head, and they will attach themselves to these kind of dark beliefs, but that's not really what's driving them. It might be just kind of an aside, a part of their belief, but they're not doing it to go and please Satan or anything like that. But you do have these fringe lunatics and psychos that have committed atrocities from time to time, but it's not definitely not a regular occurrence. So I did not see any evidence for that, at least from my research on.
Yeah, I don't see any real evidence that Halloween is being used in that sort of way. Not to say that it never happens, right? But the and this gets into the conspiracy, right? Yeah. And that's one of the things that we're talking about tonight. Yeah, conspiracies.
So let's drop the lights a little lower.
So so the conspiracy theory is that you have these Satanists out there on Halloween. They're driving around looking for stray kids, and the stats don't really show it. So while it was something that was heavily believed when I was a kid, and I heard it every Halloween, I heard it, be careful out there because there's the crazies out there and they're trying to kidnap kids and you got to stick together. And so maybe it was a conspiracy started by parents that just wanted kids to
But every other day of the year, go. I don't want you in the house. Yes. Come back in. Yes. I don't care. Okay.
That is the way it was when I was a kid. Yeah. I was sent out of the house, as soon as I was awake. And when I heard my dad whistle, it was he had a loud whistle. I could be down the block, nice. Hear that whistle and start trucking home. Nice. But yeah, Halloween it was watch out for your little sister. Be careful. So I'm guessing that maybe the conspiracy that Satanists are out on Halloween kidnapping kids, more so than on any other day. Maybe that's just something that got started by worried parents that just wanted to scare their kids into being on the lookout for little brothers and sisters and whatnot. Yeah. But yeah, there's no data that supports the conspiracy. Yeah. Right. Which is not to say that no kids ever get kidnapped on Halloween, because I'm sure it happens. But those who insist that devil worshippers are using Halloween as an opportunity just to kidnap kids for the purpose of, satanic rituals, they don't really have good evidence to support the conspiracy theory. And yet, I would point out that the most effective conspiracy theories are always built upon, kernels of truth. Mm-hmm. Right. So as we, kind of transition into talking about some more conspiracies here, to just flat out dismiss, a conspiracy whole cloth doesn't make good sense, because typically conspiracies grow out of, some, it's kind of like, when Alex Jones, talks about the black helicopters. It's just kind of like, there are black helicopters, right? And you can't deny it. I've seen them. I've looked up into the sky. I've heard and you look up and there's the black helicopter. And it's just kind of like, I wonder if Alex Jones is in that. I don't know. maybe not. But, there are black helicopters. What are they doing? I don't know. But I don't think Alex Jones fully knows either, right? Yeah. So, you can begin to build, this conspiracy of what these black helicopters are doing. But the kernel of truth is that there are unmarked black helicopters that show up every now and again, right? So
you're talking about basically people usually go to two extremes, right? They don't want to be the people that flat out deny. They just don't want to be associated with that. Right. They just don't want to even entertain anything like that. So they'd rather just be like, I deny everything.
Yeah.
But then on the other extreme, there's people that go so deep.
Yeah.
And they turn into this guy with the tinfoil hat, right?
Like, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard the story that somebody knows somebody that went in for a COVID test and the line was too long, so they left. And then later on, they got a letter saying that they tested positive for COVID, right? Oh, did that ever happen? I'm guessing it has. And I'm guessing it's happened a few times. But I've heard the story so many times by so many people who know someone, it's just kind of like at some point in time, it's just kind of like, all right, this is kind of becoming... maybe a bit of a conspiracy, with a kernel of truth that maybe this has happened on several occasions.
Yeah.
But how many times I've actually heard the story, everybody seems to know somebody that this has happened to.
I think it's time to come clean. I started it.
I knew it.
Sorry. Just wanted a little social experiment.
So going back to the Halloween thing, it's like, kids are being kidnapped every day. That's a fact, right? Yep. It's not just on Halloween. But we don't see an increase of kidnapped kids on Halloween, that's right? Important. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, every year there's more than 200,000 children that are abducted by family members. So that's the largest portion of them is parents are split up. One has more custody than the other gets frustrated and decides to go pick up a child after school and split town, right? Yeah. And 200,000 kids, that happens to every year, right? And an additional 58,000 are taken by non-relatives with primarily sexual motives. So upwards of almost 60,000 kids every year are abducted, for these nefarious purposes, right?
Not insignificant, yep.
But only 115 reported abductions represent cases in which strangers abduct and kill children or hold them for ransom or take them with the intention of keeping them for themselves, right? Yeah. So kidnapping happens. Kids are, being abducted every day, right? Yeah. But it's a conspiracy to say that this is happening more on Halloween and for satanic purposes, right? Yeah. So that, there's a kernel of truth. Yep. But then the more the story gets told and retold, it becomes a conspiracy that really isn't founded on the facts. Yeah. But at the same time, it's horrific to realize that 60,000 kids are abducted every year by pedophiles who clearly have something wrong with their brains, right? Yeah. And according to one conspiracy theory, many of these kids are actually being taken by a secret society of Satan-worshiping pedophiles who are running a global child sex trafficking ring. And this conspiracy actually started just a few days before Halloween back in 2017.
Convenient, yeah.
Right, so just a few days before Halloween in 2017, there was an anonymous entity known as Q Clearance Patriot, which sounds like a sale at an Army Navy store. Q Clearance Patriot began to post these veiled accusations on the 4chan site, and this brings us to this next conspiracy theory, which is known as QAnon. Right, so our Q&A later is actually going to be a QAnon.
QAnon. QAnon session.
But, President Trump was actually recently asked about this group known as QAnon, or more commonly called Q, and I really appreciated his answer. I don't always, like everything that the way he answers every question.
Well, you would be wrong.
Yeah, I know. All of his answers are the best. But, but this one I really do appreciate. We're going to run this video real quick.
And Christopher, at the crux of the theory is this belief that you are secretly saving the world from this satanic cult of pedophiles and cannibals. Does that sound like something you are behind?
Well, I haven't heard that, but is that supposed to be a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, you know, if I can help save the world from problems, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself out there, and we are actually. We're saving the world from a.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that he's saying, I don't know a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. You just sprung this up.
But then are we not on board with, are we not all saying right now that we're against pedophilia?
Yeah.
Can we not at least agree on this, right?
Yeah.
That it's wrong to kill kids, it's wrong to abduct them, it's wrong to torture them in these sorts of ways. Right?
So the implication there, right, it seemed to me, I think it was obvious, that if you believe just because it comes from this entity known as QAnon, that you are crazy,
right?
Even though there's a kernel of truth. So, yeah, I think that was the most reasonable
Very good answer. Very good answer.
Are we supposed to be against this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that every American should be able to take a stand today and say, regardless of whether the QAnon people are right on target or out of their minds, regardless, if they're against pedophilia, and if they're against cannibalizing kids, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
If that's what they're fighting against, it's like, yeah, good. Let's all agree to fight against that, right?
Yeah.
I think that every American can agree that, we ought to be fighting against pedophilia and cannibalism, right?
So where do we enter then into really gray area territory?
Well, so, they're making a lot of claims, or coded claims, veiled claims, accusations, about, people in high positions of authority, Hollywood elites, they're making a lot of accusations, most of them being veiled and coded that have to be interpreted, right? And that's really, in my opinion, where the conspiracy is really founded, right? Are there pedophiles in America? Yes, we know that that's the case, right? But QAnon becomes this far-right conspiracy theory which believes that there's this secret society of politicians and wealthy entrepreneurs and Hollywood A-listers, and they're actually running a global child sex trafficking ring, and this is connected to what was commonly called the Pizzagate conspiracy, which is centered around the belief that Hillary Clinton's campaign manager John Podesta and other high-ranking Democrat Party officials have been using this Comet ping pong and pizzeria place in Washington, D.C. as a front for the kidnapping and trafficking of children. So you go back a few years and this Pizzagate conspiracy hits, and then the fires of that conspiracy get further fueled by the arrest of a convicted pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, right? Epstein was a financier who owned a private island there in the Caribbean, and then according to the charges, Epstein appears to have been using his island for the purpose of sex trafficking as well as the abuse of many minors, right? And then after his arrest back in 2019, Epstein allegedly committed suicide in his own prison cell, which is, highly, contested,
yes.
Right? So, it's possible that, that he was actually murdered. And a lot of people believe that he was murdered. And the reason why is because his pedo parties were attended by very, powerful people.
Yeah.
Right?
Say that 3 times fast.
His pedo parties were attended by powerful people. So now,
let me get that out.
remember, the most effective conspiracy theories are always built upon kernels of truth. And so, Epstein's arrest and death, coupled together with the list of people who visited the island, the people on his flight records and whatnot, all of that has really provided increasing evidence in support of the argument of those who insist that there is, in fact, a secret society of satanic, worshipers that are pedophiles and who are running this global child sex trafficking ring.
And cannibals, yeah.
And then cannibalizing many of the kids they kidnapped, right? So with all that being the case, it's no wonder why more and more people are actually embracing this QAnon conspiracy as they believe the posts of those who are seeking to expose this secret society of Satan worshiping pedophiles, and so there's many aspects of this conspiracy.
Yes.
Right. It's kind of like an umbrella under which are multiple conspiracies, right?
Yeah.
But most of this is just based around mysterious posts with coded language that followers are attempting to decode. So they're called Q drops or breadcrumbs, right?
Yeah.
And this information appears it was started on 4chan, and then it moved to, I believe, 8chan, then 8kun, and these meme.
Social platforms,
image, based platforms where people are posting images and information, right? And so these Q drops or these breadcrumbs are being left by Q, or maybe others who claim to be Q.
Nobody knows who Q is.
And nobody knows who Q is. Nobody knows, if it's all coming from the same person or multiple people. And some people even argue that Trump is Q or Trump is part of Q. And that's why the reporter was asking him, "Are you really in support of this whole thing?" Because they're claiming that he's in the group and attempting to help them to do all this, right? But where it becomes an issue for us, much like we talked about Halloween, can Christians be involved with this?
Yeah.
Should Christians, and came down to conviction, right? Well, this is a little bit different, right? There are many in the church today who are spending a lot of time examining all these secret signals. They're looking at the concealed acronyms and the grammatical puzzles, and you take every capital word from this post and you add it all up and it means this. Really? How do you know? Right? Because the minute you start playing these games, the minute you start using codes to overcome coded messages, because that's one of the things. They go back and look at all the Podesta emails, right? And it says pizza, and it says handkerchief, and it says all these certain things, and it's coded language. And so they're going to combat this coded language with this coded language over here, so that people have to figure out what all this means, so that then we can understand what all that means, and it's just very confusing.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of Christians that are spending a lot of time examining the secret signals and the concealed acronyms and the grammatical puzzles, and they're trying to decode all this data with the goal of exposing the satanic plans of those who are the true enemy of America. Now, I think you would be in favor of the conviction of every pedophile in America, right?
Yes.
Can we agree on that,
yes,
right?
And more, yes.
Easily. I think that we can agree that if there are these pedophiles in the government or in Hollywood, or wherever they are, that if we can, pull up some evidence and put them on trial and convict them of their crimes, I'm all for it. Right. So, and I think that was the Trump answer, which was, hey, if there's a group out there trying to stop pedophiles, let's support them. Let's agree with them, because I agree that is a worthwhile endeavor. Right. At the same time, though, there's a lot of accusations. There's a lot of accusations being made against people who have put themselves in a certain light that they can be accused, right?
Yeah.
You look at some of these Hollywood A-listers and the jokes that they're telling on Twitter and the images that they're putting out there, and you're looking at this going, these guys look guilty, right? But is there evidence to actually accuse them of pedophilia, right? Is there evidence to accuse Hillary Clinton of cannibalizing kids? The accusation has been made, but is there evidence to support it, right? I would just say that every accusation that we make against somebody, we have to be careful, because these accusations have to be based on something more than secret codes. Like, what if somebody, looked at one of your emails and took the first, capital letter of every word and walked away from that and said, oh, this is what Reuben's really saying here. And then began to launch a campaign against you, based on decoding some message that you sent to some friend, and it was just a silly joke. And I mean, how would you deal with that?
Yeah, so it's the idea of putting the shoe on the other foot, like, or walking a mile in their shoes. How would you feel if somebody did that against you, right? And we're making these, hardcore allegations against specific people for specific crimes. We kind of tend to feel separation from it, and so that's, I think, why a lot of us feel free to make such accusations, right? Because, who are they? They're politicians. I'm never going to meet them in my life. I don't care about them. So we feel free to just kind of speculate and really entertain a lot of these conspiracies. I get it. Yeah. So you're asking, going down that road.
When I look at all of this, I can't help but to think about my friend Hannah Overton, who, had a foster child pass away under her care. Turns out that the child had pica, which is an eating disorder, but then also had a rare form of diabetes, which was to the salt side of it rather than the sugar side. And this child got into the cupboard, ate a bunch of, basically
seasoning.
It was like seasoning, like ramen, packets.
Right.
And ends up, going into, I don't know if it was cardiac arrest or what it was, but basically went into, kind of a salt coma.
Yeah.
They rushed this child to the hospital rather than calling an ambulance because they figured they could get there faster, right? Get to the hospital. They don't know what's wrong, so they shoot the child up with some sodium, which is pretty typical, and child dies, right? And then the campaign against Hannah started. She's a murderer. She murdered this foster child.
Yeah.
They put it, took her to court, found her guilty, locked her away. I think she was, I want to say that she was in prison for 7 years.
I think it was around 7.
It was about 7 years before, new evidence was brought forth. The pica issue was brought up. So she was eventually released, right? But here's a mother and
a real person
and a wife that I know personally, right? Just dear, sweet sister in Christ, wouldn't hurt a fly, wouldn't speak ill of you, right? But here she is spending 7 years in prison because false accusations were made against her. And so that's part of my passion for just saying, it's possible that some of these people getting accused are actually guilty of what they're being accused of. I'm not going to make the accusation, though, until there's real evidence, not just they told jokes online. Right. Yeah. If I was guilty of everything that I've ever joked about, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. It just doesn't make sense. People tell jokes about all kinds of stuff, and while I look at like the Chrissy Teigen jokes and the Tom Hanks stuff, and I look at this and I'm disgusted by it. It is disgusting, no doubt about it. But again, just because somebody jokes about something doesn't mean they're guilty of what they're joking about. And that's where we got to be really careful, especially in light of the 9th commandment. The 9th commandment says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's huge. That's one of the 10 commandments,
Exactly.
God is saying, hey, this is very important to me.
He's serious about that stuff, yeah.
Right? And the Bible's filled with these verses. I've got a couple here that I wanted to list. In Psalm 101, the psalmist says, whoever secretly slanders his neighbor, him I will destroy.
And who is your neighbor?
Yeah, anybody.
Right.
So whoever secretly slanders his neighbor, him I will destroy.
Yeah.
That's big stuff right there, right? Paul to Pastor Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 1. We know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and insubordinate, for the ungodly and for sinners, for the unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for fornicators, for sodomites, for kidnappers, for liars, for perjurers. And if there is any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. Now, when we put all that together, according to Paul, those who commit perjury, right, and those who lie through false accusation, these people are clumped together with fornicators, sodomites, and kidnappers.
Yeah.
So if you're using false accusation or you're engaging in perjury in order to accuse someone that you believe could potentially be a pedophile, Paul is saying, hey, you're on the list too. If they're not a pedophile and you're saying that they're a pedophile, then you're a liar and a perjurer, and you're found on the same list of people who are, sinful. Yeah. So we need real evidence before we begin to call someone a pedophile. Right?
Yeah, and that's where, again, that's kind of like a big part of, why we do this show. Studio 118 is, when I say brought to you by Isaiah 118, where God's telling us, come let us reason. The Christian faith, as Christians, as the disciples of Jesus, we're called to a higher standard of not only living, trying to live righteously and holy as our Lord does, but part of that also is to love him with our mind and to be good stewards with our mind as well. So when we reason about certain subjects in society, within our fellowship here, we need to still make sure that we're still abiding by God's word, which includes do not bear false witness, do not go and slander each other, no matter if we're so separated from the people that we're talking about. And so that's where I always kind of draw it back to is like what you were talking about is that was a good exercise in put the shoe on the other foot. If that were you, how would you be reacting, right? So let's not go and speculate to the point where we're already so sure in our mind without evidence that we're condemning these people, that they're guilty in our heads, right? Yeah. And so that's a good exercise for just Christians in general who are getting wrapped up into these conspiracy theories, specifically the QAnon. Now, I'll be honest, when you brought it up, I was like, I don't even know what QAnon is, but the more I started looking into it, I do see that, it is kind of making headway. It's making its way into the church, yes. Especially, right?
And that's my concern is that, now you've got Christians in the church echoing these accusations. Mm-hmm. Now you've got Christians. And Christian, we have to understand that, Christian and conservative aren't necessarily synonymous. Yes. And I think that there's a lot of Christians on the right who tie this all together that, well, conservative and Christian, same thing. Mm. It's like, well, not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives that are atheists. There's a lot of conservatives that have alternative lifestyles. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives who are going to vote for Trump this year, but would never darken the door of a church because they don't believe in Jesus Christ, right? So we have to really make a distinction between conservatism and Christianity. They're not necessarily the same thing, though there's a lot of crossover. And so it's easy for us to start thinking, oh, Christian equals conservatism, right? It's not true, though. But, because this is such a right-wing, conservative group of people who, have dedicated themselves to fighting the real enemy, which they believe is, everybody on the left. Yeah. You got a lot of conservative Christians who are jumping on this bandwagon, and now they're accusing, this person and that person. And listen, before you accuse a Hollywood A-lister of being a pedophile, make sure that there's actual evidence of it, not just they told some bad jokes, right? That's not enough evidence to make the accusation, right? Before we accuse a politician of cannibalizing kids for their adrenochrome, make sure make sure you've got video. Make sure you have witnesses. I mean, if so, then hey, let's lock them up. Mm-hmm. I'm all for locking them up. I'm all for prosecuting and punishing, but we have to have real evidence, or else that's why it can't be taken to a court of law. Because if these people actually had evidence of these accusations, then we could build a case, take it to court, and prosecute, right? Listen, if there are these satanic pedophile rings, then then I'm all for putting them away, punishing their crimes. But listen, it's also a sin against the Lord to make accusations that you don't have evidence for, right? So, you need more than some anonymous source who claims to be in the know and presented you with a coded, post that you had to decipher to even understand, how to make sense of it. It's got to be more than that before you make the accusation, Christian. And listen, I also encourage you to realize that we've actually been called to preach the gospel message. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for exposing evil, right? But our true call, our commission under Christ is to preach the good news of the gospel. Jesus, being God incarnate, knew about QAnon, before the world was formed, right? Jesus knew that there would be this entity QAnon. And if he wanted us to get on board with it, he could have just simply told us in the Word. He could have just simply told us in the Scriptures, hey, there's going to be an organization called QAnon. You get on board with it and just echo everything they say. But he didn't. He gave us the Great Commission. And listen, we haven't been called to decipher Q drops so that we can receive the new orders from these new leaders. No, we've been given our orders. Yeah. The orders are the Great Commission. We haven't been called to use the political system to stop the rise of the Antichrist. That's ridiculous. God has ordained the time and determined the day and the hour when the Antichrist will rise up and rule over the world. So if you think that you're really trying to stop the Antichrist from coming along, God's already determined that he's going to. It's going to happen, right? So we can't stop that from happening. It's pointless to try to stop evil actors who are preparing the world for the Antichrist, because this is actually in line with God's plan to bring about the second coming of Jesus, right? With that being the case, the Lord has actually commanded us to go make disciples. That's what he's called us to do. not maintain American conservatism, though I'm on board with maintaining American conservatism, right? But that's not our number one goal. Our number one goal is to go and make disciples by teaching them everything that Jesus Christ has commanded us. In other words, everything that we need to know about our Christian commission, it's already in the New Testament. Yeah. We don't have to go to 4chan to find more information. It's not there. The information that we need to know what the Christian is called to do is found in the New Testament. And what this also means is that a clearance patriot, he can't provide us with anything new that will help us to accomplish the Great Commission of Jesus Christ. And it's also, we should also test the instructions. Yep. Right? You've got some scriptures here about testing all things, right?
Yeah, in 1 John 4:1, John wrote, "Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirit." And Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 to test all things and to hold fast what is good.
That's right.
And that's part of our calling as well. Again, like I was mentioning, is to be wise, be sober, be vigilant and sober-minded. And so we have to test the spirits, test these things.
We need to test every doctrine too, and especially these new doctrines that are being presented by the QAnon group. There's one QAnon patriot who insists that the problems here in America aren't because of our sinful nature. Right? Basically, the video which presents the Q plan to save the world. This video actually argues that in our nature we're good. Yeah. In our nature we want to do the right thing. In our nature we don't want to be racist. In our nature we don't want to be greedy and stingy.
But something happened.
What?
Yeah. First of all, yeah.
And then they go on. The video, the person that created the video goes on to make the argument that what's really the problem is this evil entity in the government that is tricking us into being this way. That's not biblical. That doctrine does not line up with Scripture. According to the same social media influencer who claims to represent Q, this person would have us to believe that we're naturally good people who are just being manipulated. And the fact is that this does not line up with Scripture. The same producer of this video, which again is titled "The Plan to Save the World." Now think about that for a moment. So this person who represents Q is telling us what the plan is to save the world. Now, the plan, if it were a biblical plan, then this person would spend this video pointing to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because that's the plan, right? That's God's plan for saving the world. It's turning people, leading them to Jesus so that they trust in Jesus and get saved. And then He helps us by the power of the Holy Spirit to overcome our sinful nature, right? But the video doesn't go anywhere near this, right? The closest that it comes is it basically just dismisses Christianity as a non-issue, right? The QAnon plan to save the world, according to this video, has nothing to do with the cross of Christ. The voice of the video refers to the distinction between Christianity and Islam as a petty partisan division, which is nothing more than a trivial distraction. Wow. So they're conservative. Yeah. But they are not Christian. Yeah. They are conservative, but they are not Christian. To sum up the distinctions between Christianity and Islam as a petty partisan division, which is nothing more than a trivial distraction, it's basically like saying, Islam, Christianity doesn't really matter. Right. What really matters is that we defeat the secret society of Satanists. Yeah. Well, why is being a Satanist bad? If religious distinctions aren't an issue, they're just trivial, then what's wrong with worshiping Satan? Yep. Right? Listen, rather than encouraging people to find their unity in the salvation that is provided by the Lord Jesus Christ, the QAnon activist encourages us to embrace another form of unity. This is established by the leaders of Q who, remember, are anonymous. They don't come and present us with who they are. They remain anonymous, but then they tell us about unity. So you want us to unify with anonymous people, right? But their call to unity is found in the slogan, "Where we go one, we go all."
Kind of like all for one.
Yeah. This was actually etched into JFK's bell on his boat, right?
Oh, okay. Another connection. I see it.
Yeah. So, and then of course JFK is still alive, and so on and so forth. But the rabbit hole is deep on this thing, man.
Two shooters.
But listen, if this unity, which is promoted by Q, was centered around the essential doctrines of the Christian faith, I would be less concerned about how this is impacting the church. You know, if the leaders of Q were actually pointing people to unity in Jesus Christ and according to the truth of the Word, I'd be like, yeah, Q, cool. You know, let's get on board. You know, they're all about Jesus and they're fighting pedophiles. I'm down with that, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. They dismiss Christianity, from what I can tell. Maybe I'm not saying that all people who embrace Q aren't Christian. I'm just saying that, you know, the sources from the leadership that I'm seeing here, it's kind of dismissing Christianity and really just fighting for conservatism, you know, American style.
Yeah.
So, listen, I think we should all stand against child abusers. I think we should all stand against pedophiles and cannibals and all of that. We should take a stand against all of that. So I'm on board with Trump's answer when he said that, you know, this is a bad thing to fight against this stuff. It's like, yeah, this is a great thing to fight against this stuff. And at the same time, though, I don't believe that Christians ought to be aligning with groups who make accusations while hiding behind anonymity, while simultaneously insisting that Trump is our savior and not Jesus. So with all of that, I going back into the conspiracy theory itself, you know, are there Satan worshiping pedophiles in the highest levels of government and in Hollywood? Maybe. You know, I don't have enough evidence to say either way. Would I be surprised? Not at all. I think there's enough evidence to think that there's a kernel of truth here that gives itself to the greater conspiracy.
Yeah.
Can I start running down a checklist of who I think is guilty of these things? No, not until there's real evidence. But what I do know is that we've been given the Great Commission to go out and preach the gospel so that maybe these pedophiles might repent and trust in Jesus Christ. That's God's plan to redeem mankind, is to take every form of sinner, regardless of the sins that we're guilty of, and, you know, bring them into a relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ so that sinners of every stripe can be transformed and changed.
Yeah, so we're also not in the business of policing what people are reading and exposing themselves to and what information they take in, right? But there is, again, these biblical principles about prioritizing our time and making sure that we're not, you know, as Christians, we're going to be judged by for our idle words, our idle speech, that, you know, everything we've spoken about in our life. This is part of what we're going to be judged as Christians, right? So as Christians, we need to be aware of these things and making sure that we're prioritizing the spread of the gospel over and above or over and against these conspiracy theories, whatever they are, right? Yeah. And so, I think that's right on, man. That again, we can't say either or, but how are we prioritizing our time in the end?
I think Jesus really presented us with his plan to save the world, you know, and we see part of this in the question about, okay, so, you know, what role should we have in government? And I'm not saying that the church should have no role in human government, and we certainly, you know, I'm all for electing, you know, Christian politicians who are going to legislate biblical morality, and I'm all for that, right? But I also can't help but to remember what Christ Jesus said when he stood before a Roman governor, you know, as he stood before Pilate, right? So he's standing there before the political leader in his area at that time, and Jesus says to this Roman governor, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Right? So we haven't been called to try to establish the kingdom of Christ with a hostile takeover. And there are some stripes of Christianity who believe, you know, that in order to usher in the second coming of Christ, we have to take control of the government. We have to take control, manifest sons of Christ. You know, we're going to manifest the kingdom of God, you know, by taking control of all the different mountains of the world arenas, you know, and
Dominion theology.
the Dominion theology. And nowhere do we see this in the scriptures.
Right.
You know, that Jesus says, you know, perfectly clear that his disciples are not going to fight to establish the kingdom of God here on earth. No, that's going to happen when Jesus Christ returns and establishes his throne there in Israel. So, you know, what's our job until then? To occupy. We are to occupy until he returns. And what that means is that we are to preach the great commission of Jesus Christ. We are to preach the gospel message so that all kinds of sinners can repent of their sins and get saved. We don't need to align ourselves with conservative groups, and, you know, who are, you know, trying to, you know, push forward the conservative agenda. We need to preach the gospel message. So that, you know, we can lead people to Jesus Christ. But so, you know, getting back into, you know, the conspiracy aspect of this then, right? You know, should Christians embrace the QAnon conspiracies? And, you know, my take on it is that, you know, it kind of seems to be a distractor from what we've actually been called to do. And while, you know, I think every Christian should take a stand against pedophilia, should take a stand against cannibalism and all these sorts of things. And when the evidence is there, and if we have the bandwidth to actually engage in the jury or you know, help be an eyewitness or whatever the case, I'm all for taking part in the legal system of punishing evildoers. I'm on board with that. But until that day, if we're spending all of our time, you know, trying to figure out Q drops when we should be out preaching the gospel, we're missing it.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it sounds like medicine. I don't even want to take that. So, no, thank you. Yeah, good stuff, man. Right here, I want to pause because it's been a while, and I want to remind our viewers, you are watching Studio 118 here at Calvary South Austin. Thank you for sticking with us. We are streaming live on YouTube, and we are streaming live on Austin Cable Access Channel 11. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, we're talking about Halloween and other such conspiracy theories that surround that holiday. And so hope you're enjoying this discussion. Just as a reminder, we have a Q&A portion after our discussion. So send in your questions, anything related to our topic tonight, anything you've heard about, anything you want clarification on. Do it there on the live chat on YouTube, or you can email your questions to outreach@calvarysouthaustin.com. Or you can also call us. Call in your question. We'll queue it up. Call 512-576-5433. That's 512-576-5433, and we will queue up your questions. So thank you for joining us. And as we mentioned, we've talked about origins of Halloween and how did it get incorporated and what's the relationship with the church, and also what modern Halloween looks like. What are these customs and traditions? Then we leapt into QAnon, our first conspiracy theory there, and how should Christians view this, and how should we be yoked to this kind of conspiracy theory? So hopefully you've been enjoying the discussion so far. Looking forward to the questions coming after, but now we're going to turn our attention into another interesting development, at least for me, the past couple of weeks, and just researching, different cultural aspects and related things to Halloween, such as the witchcraft, Satanism, and all this kind of stuff. And it recently came to my attention. So we're going to talk about a kind of a controversial issue, but it's relevant here. So we've been seeing civil unrest recently, right? With and Black Lives Matter movement and all the events surrounding that.
So wait, we just offended everyone on the right.
Yes.
Now we're going to offend everyone on the left.
Yes,
is that what's happening here?
Because equity, man.
we got to be equal. Yes. Offensive to everyone. So that's what we're going for tonight.
Yes. So this is 2020. Yes. You get it all. And this is a huge cultural moment. What we're seeing, a movement known as Black Lives Matter movement, which has been around for years, even since the death of Trayvon Martin several years ago. And just recently, it came to my attention from an interview that one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as one of the kind of local chapter co-founders in Los Angeles, they did an interview with one another, and they were talking about just kind of their motivations and their kind of behind the scenes thought process of how they view, what are their goals in this movement, and what motivates them, right? And so it's very interesting to me. One of the co-founders, whose name is Patrice Cullors, and the local Los Angeles chapter co-founder by the name of Melina Abdullah. So they interviewed each other on June 13th of this year. and it's part of a video that was put on by the Fowler Museum at UCLA. And I want to just play a couple of clips from this interview just to kind of lay the groundwork as to what we're talking about here, because it's very interesting. You'll hear it in their own words, but it seems that they are heavily influenced by witchcraft type beliefs, and that really motivates some of what they do for the Black Lives Matter movement. So I want to play these couple of clips, a couple minutes long, and then we'll talk about it on the back end.
And I think that that part of our calling as people who do this work for Black lives is to lift our people up a lot, both in their living, but also in their death, and that the need to lift our folks up feels so incredibly spirit-driven for me.
We do feel like when we say the names, right? So we speak their names, we say her name, say their names, we do that all the time, that you kind of invoke that spirit, and then those spirits actually become present with you, right? And so as I was listening to you, there's two pieces in the prayer that really stood out for me with regard to this. One is as your voice breaks, right? When you talk about his family and all of the Black people in Brunswick, Georgia. But two is when you say, and am I, like that's your homie, right? like you're just talking to, your friend that you know that's with you. And I think it really illustrates what it is you're saying, because we do that often. Some of, and maybe I'm sharing too much, but we become very intimate with the spirits that we call on regularly, right? Like each of them seems to have a different presence and personality. I laugh a lot with Waukesha, and I didn't meet her in her body, right? I met her through this work. As we talk about ancestral work, I would like us to kind of, for me, it almost seemed like my spiritual work in Black Lives Matter, even though I lived in the same body and didn't pretend like we weren't doing, I never abandoned who I was spiritually, but it took almost a year for me to realize that when we come out into the streets and we pray, the first thing that we do when we hear of a murder is we come out, we pray, we pour libation, and we build with the community where the person's life was stolen. And it took almost a year for me to realize that this movement is much more than a racial and social justice movement. At its core, it's a spiritual movement, because we're literally standing on spilled blood, right?
Yeah.
And you can't pretend like that's work that's just like some organizing work. That's, that's some serious stuff, right?
All right. Well, those three clips, number one, were very revealing, very open and honest, and obviously that's great. But what we do want to concentrate here on tonight is how does that line up with Christianity for one, but then also how are we supposed to, just like with the QAnon deal, how are Christians supposed to relate to this Black Lives Matter movement and participate in this movement? Now, I do want to make a distinction just out front, just before we jump in full force to this discussion, is that we're talking about the movement, this organization that has been brought up, and the founders themselves, and their beliefs that they've just openly and honestly talked about. We're not talking about Black lives themselves. Obviously, as Christians, we believe that everyone is bearing the image of God, and so in that sense, they all have dignity. So we're not talking about, please don't misconstrue what we're talking about here. We're not racist, we're not bigoted or anything like that. We want to talk about the specific beliefs that are being brought up, and then how does that influence the leaders as they go through in promoting their organization. So just want to lay that out.
Coming from a home that, had Native American on my father's side, French on my mother's side. Both were very much on. I guess you would call them allies, maybe, or very much in support of the black community. One of my first book reports was on Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. I mean, that's one of the first book reports I ever did as a kid, just from the influence of my own mother, who really promoted all of that. It should be stated unequivocally that we believe that black lives matter.
Yes, of course.
But take issue with the Black Lives Matter Incorporated movement.
Yes. Yes, well put. So as they mentioned, maybe the audio was a little bit poor, but some of the things that they were saying was, number one, Patrisse Cullors is mentioning, she's one of the co-founders, and she's mentioning how this movement is very spirit-driven. And so she holds some religious beliefs, and she says that this is definitely high up there in terms of what is driving me when I run this movement. And then Abdullah, I forget her first name, but then she, later on in the interview, she jumps into talking about how this common phrase that has been jumping up is whenever these shootings occur, say her name or say his name, say their name. And for them, it is a very much spiritual invocation where they are trying to communicate or make contact with the deceased in terms of trying to resurrect, in a sense, their spirit so the spirit can then help them in their movement and then bring forth justice.
Right.
So I encourage you to definitely watch the entire interview. You can find it online.
Yeah, she actually says that it's more than a hashtag.
Yes, she does say more than a hashtag for them. Yep.
She actually says this is more than a hashtag. This is a spiritual conjuring, is what it is, and it's really based in West African witchcraft.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing. So it's a very specific form of West African witchcraft, right? And I think you had some information there where that kind of stems from.
Well, yeah. So, first of all, I would just point out that Patrisse Cullors clearly believes that this is a spiritual conjuring, that there's power in saying the name of those who are deceased. And I'm not here to weigh in on were these justified, shootings, were these unjustified. I mean, there's so much to just open up on that alone that we don't have time. So regardless of the stance that you specifically hold as far as Breonna and were the cops right, were they wrong, regardless of all of that, the point is that they believe that when you say the name, that you're actually resurrecting their spirit. The conjuring spell is designed to invoke and call forth the spirit of the name that you're saying. So it's not just say the name and remember this person's life.
Right.
Say the name and honor this person who is deceased. Right. It is say the name because as we all say the name together, there's a conjuring that's occurring. They're encouraging every person to take part in this spirit conjuring as they command people to say these names. There's one researcher, Abraham Hamilton III. He's the host of the Hamilton Corner. He tells us that the leaders of BLM are seeking to summon the spirits of the dead by adhering to the Yoruba religion of Ifa. So the religion is Ifa, and according to another researcher, Ifa is a faith and divination system with its roots in Yoruba land. And this region, just to be clear, this region encompasses the nations of Benin, Togo, Ghana, and parts of Nigeria. Hopefully I pronounced all that correctly. But like many other religious systems around the world, this African religion of Ifa includes magic. It's based in spiritism as well as the use of traditional medicines and the veneration of the dead. And according to Abraham Hamilton, he says that one of the touchstones of this religious practice is ancestral worship. And then he says, guess what the Bible calls that, folks? witchcraft.
Yes.
Right. So when he says that the practice is ancestral worship, I'll remind you of I believe it was Patrice Cullors when she talked about the ancestral work that they're engaging in, as she talked about the spirits that we call upon. Right. Yeah. She referred to this as ancestral work, whereas he refers to it as just straight up ancestral worship, which is witchcraft. Yeah. We've seen these top leaders of BLM confess that they're conjuring dead spirits. Yeah. I mean, that's their own words. They confess that they are invoking spirits. As they say the name of the deceased, they have put it plainly. We're not making this stuff up. We're not putting words into their mouths. You saw the video clips. They're confessing that they're engaging in this religious system. With that, coming from a biblical perspective, we can see that the BLM movement, at least at the top levels of leadership, is engaging in witchcraft by engaging in these what are known as conjuring rituals. Alma Jean Billingsley Brown offers an articulation of how conjurers are conceptualized by insisting that the conjurer contains a sacred dimension, a transcendent sphere of awe and untouchability derived from the features of spirit possession, altered states of consciousness, and spirit worship, manifested practically in the acts of healing, divination, and the casting and uncrossing of spells. A conjurer works through the use of curative herbs, roots, ritual amulets, fetishes, and oral and transcribed incantations. Oral and transcribed incantations. A conjurer includes, but is certainly not limited to, root workers, fortune tellers, midwives, herbalists, hoodoo doctors, voodoo queens, spiritual mediums, communicating with the dead. Person is born with a cowl or a second sight, or others who are gifted with verbal or visual communication with the spirit world. The term conjure woman, this is all tied to West African religions. The conjure woman works as an umbrella term for the various forms of healing and spiritual practices with expressly African derivations that appear in African American literature, right? So you've heard it from their own mouth. Mm-hmm. You've seen some of this research now. You've considered what researchers are saying about this Ifa and the conjuring that they engage in as they call forth the spirits of ancestors.
And apparently maintain some form of communication, yes. As Medina Abdullah was talking about. She talks to Waikisha.
Yes.
And she says she didn't meet her in her body. She met her through the movement that they're doing, through the work that they're doing. So they maintain some form of communication with them.
So then the question is, can a Christian engage in these conjuring, or should the Christian? Of course, a Christian can if they want, but
yeah,
right. But should a Christian take part in these conjuring, incantations where you say the name?
Yes, and this is where I think the Bible just speaks so clearly on this aspect, right? Not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament.
Yes.
And if I could just share a couple of passages here. Number one, in the Old Testament, right? So this is from the beginning. So Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 10 through 12, God is trying to direct his people as to how they should be living their lives in relation to the pagan nations around them, and he instructs them, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out before you. He's talking about the pagan nations there around in that time period. They were involved. They were heavily involved. This was part of their pagan religion system. They were involved in these practices. And he's saying, avoid it all. You need to stand out as my creation, as my the apple of my eye, my chosen people. You need to stand out from these pagan nations. And so that whole list of spiritists, mediums, soothsayers, sorcerers, people were conjuring up the dead. And then we jump over to the New Testament and say, oh, okay, well, that's Old Testament. Some people believe there's different gods, orchestrating the whole deal from Old Testament, New Testament. Well, the message stays the same. Paul writes in his letter to the Galatians, in Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 through 20, Paul writes, "Now the works of the flesh are evident." The works of the flesh, these are things that you do not want to partake in the works of the flesh. He says they're evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, and dissensions and heresies. And I want to key in on that word sorcery there. Because the underlying word and used in the Greek there is pharmakia, which is where we get our word pharmacy from, but it is known there at the time where these diviners or these sorcerers would essentially use concoctions to cast spells or to perform some sort of illusions or magic, as it were. And they were known as sorcerers. So the same condemnation that was issued in the Old Testament is again repeated in the New Testament. So this seems to just be a wide, broad brush condemnation on these sorts of practices, which is what we're seeing that the founders so clearly admitted to that they're involved in. So it's very interesting. I think the Bible just speaks clearly in terms of that question, should a Christian be involved in these incantations? And I think it's clearly no. Clearly no. Christians should be, in fact, speaking up against these things. Now, can they stand up for justice? Of course. Of course. That is what the true and living God is all about. But as far as the method in which you do is, you do not want to yoke yourself to somebody who is doing things that are antithetical to what God has called him to do.
Yes. Should we grieve for the loss of life in all of these situations? Whether it be a criminal, a cop, an innocent victim, regardless of the loss of life, I think we should grieve all of that, right? I think in a perfect world, there would be no death. So when we see the loss of life, when we see someone maybe that's innocent that gets shot, in the line of fire, when we see, an officer just trying to do his job or her job, and ends up dying in the process. Well, even when we see, someone who's engaged in criminal activity and they lose their life, in the process, it's like, all of that is grieving. All of that is just tragic. But should we engage in magical incantations in order to engage in ancestral work, in order to conjure their spirit, so that we can somehow get justice for them? Is that something a Christian should engage in? And I would most certainly argue no, but even further than that, I would pose the question of what are they actually conjuring?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I was thinking, because some people, right, will say, well, what's the big deal? If I don't believe in that stuff, it's not going to affect me. I could still partake in the rituals or whatever, because, the rituals are designed to evoke, emotions, to tug on the heartstrings, and to be very illustrative of we need to honor the dead, but what they're actually doing is partaking in a religious ritual. So some people say, what's the big deal?
Right.
And so you're asking, well,
even the pouring out, like when I was in the world and lost, and
pouring for your homies.
We pour a little out for the homies, right?
Yeah.
We, if we had a brother or a friend or something, pass away or something, we'd pour some out at the funeral and honor them. And you come to find out that that's actually tied to West African magic, right? This is actually an offering to the spirit as part of a conjuring, right?
So maybe put that question another way is, who is Medina Abdullah speaking with?
Yes.
She's conjured something up, and who she believes she's communicating with someone, a spirit. What is the nature of that spirit?
So what's the name of that spirit again? Is it Wakisha, right? Yeah. So what came to this lady representing itself as Wakisha? Right, and then this gets into the same question of, okay, so somebody is woken up in the middle of the night because there's a tug at the bed, and they open their eyes and it's their grandma that just passed away, right? Is that their grandma? Mm-hmm. So what are these spirits? You see these ghost hunter shows, and when you listen to them talk,
I don't see them.
I love them, man, because it just especially the ones that are trying to help the homeowner, and they're talking about, well, this is actually this is a good spirit, and they're just gonna bounce a ball down the steps, once a night, and it'll be fine, and they're no harm, no foul, right? It's just the spirit of a kid that died in the house 100 years ago, right?
He's just trying to keep playing. thing. Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
really, you know that? You know this?
Yeah. Or, in keeping with the Halloween theme, right? I remember the biggest, one of the biggest things growing up was the warning of, you better not play with that Ouija board. I of course, as a rebellious kid in 5th grade, I do remember we cut one out of paper and we're there,
Wow.
and we're messing with that stuff. But there are stories, of course, that people actually do feel the deal moving by itself, and they actually do come in contact with something.
I've actually got just a slew of stories about the Ouija board and interactions with spirits.
To be the B-roll.
I mean, just I could fill the rest of the night with stories.
Let's do it. We got time, man.
And it was tied to pharmakia.
Yeah.
Because we were all dropping LSD and doing all kinds of hallucinogens and taking Ouija boards to haunted houses. There was a place called the Fat Farm up in East Texas, which was, basically a place that fat kids got dropped off at to get skinny and they were closed by the time I was born, so I didn't get to go. But
I thought it was a clothing line.
But yeah, right.
Yeah, I remember that.
Wow,
I had that.
That's good. Yeah. So and it was haunted, so we took the Ouija board there, and we'd go to this cemetery, and it got to the point where there was clear poltergeist occurrences. Like there was one night where we were at this one place, and one of the guys that was living there, this biker buddy of mine, just hated this stuff, was totally afraid of ghosts and these sorts of things. And he took the Ouija board and threw it away, went out to the dumpster. Right,
yeah.
And came back in, and he was just threatening, like, if you bring this back into my house. We wake up the next day, and it's on the seat of his motorcycle. And not one of us went out there, right? So it was just...
Did you play Jumanji?
But the same night, we had the Ouija board out, and we were just kind of like, well, if you're real, then turn on the light. The light over the table was off, and the light blew up.
Oh, wow.
And then I said, well, if you're real, what's my mother's maiden name? Because I knew nobody in this house knew what my mother's maiden name was, and it spelled it out, right? So this stuff's real. I mean, I woke up one night to just a vortex of spirits swirling above the bed. I woke up, and I'm just looking at this going, oh, man, this is not good, right? Just all kinds of crazy stuff. I've got stories upon stories about, conjuring spirits. So this stuff is legit.
Yeah.
What is it, though? Mm-hmm. What is a spirit guide, right? Does your grandma come back and talk to you in the middle of the night? Or are these demons masquerading as relatives in order to earn and gain trust so that they can manipulate us? And biblically speaking, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
That makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, because again, as Christians, right, our authority is going to be the Bible. And the Bible clearly, obviously, there is a spiritual realm, a spiritual dimension that is not visible to us.
Right.
Although in certain cases, I know there's a character in the Bible who that dimension is opened up to him temporarily, is able to see, right? And there's clearly a spiritual realm. There is a spiritual battle going on, and at various times in various ways, there's crossover, I guess, what you would call it, or ability for these spiritual beings to affect the physical reality, right?
Yes.
And now, if you're opening yourself up, meaning if you're going and looking for these things and spells and doing certain rituals, I mean,
I
don't be
guarantee
surprised.
you will find it. You will find it, and it's there, and it's ready to interact, right? These spirits. And
are there any that are good, as these ghost hunters and other people would have you?
Well, I certainly believe there's angels, and then demons are fallen angels. They're the angels that follow the devil in his rebellion, right? And you can go on our website and listen to my studies on both Satanology and demonology. I've done studies on both of these things. But the fact of the matter is that we are surrounded by a realm that's beyond our understanding. I think it was a Jewish commentator named I think it was Maimonides. I always get him confused with Nachmanides, but
What's one letter?
You know who knows? My Maimonides.
That's horrible. Coming.
That's the worst. So it was worth it. It was worth it. So he came to the conclusion just by studying the book of Genesis that there's I think it's 23 dimensions around us, but we're only understanding the four that we recognize, right? Mm-hmm. But so there's many more. I forget the exact number of how many he came to the conclusion on, but a study of Genesis led him to believe that there's multiple dimensions that we don't really have an awareness of. Like there's a veil. And then that gets into the question that I have as far as when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And is that a veiling of dimensions that they had access to prior to the fall that now we don't have access to, and won't until the new heaven and the new earth, right? So regardless of all that speculation,
sure.
Coming back to, are there spirits around us? And the answer is yes. We constantly see stories in the scriptures of angels coming on scene. You see Daniel praying for help, and after a series of time, finally Gabriel shows up. But then he was delayed because he was at war with an evil spirit, right. Who was basically manipulating one of the kings on the planet, right? Mm-hmm. So we certainly see these things. We even see the devil coming before God and asking about Job, and God allowing the devil to go and harass Job as a test, and he could do as many things up until this point. He couldn't take Job's life, right? So we certainly see the veil pulled back through the scriptures that there is this spirit realm. There are fallen angels. There are good angels, and they're amongst us. And they're looking down upon us and aiding us or harassing us. There are demons that are attacking our minds, trying to deceive us. And you better believe that part of that deception is that if you're looking to communicate with your dead relative, they're going to come and fill the shoes. And they've been, chances are we all have our own personal, entities that have stuck with us and our family, right? So I could imagine that, these demons who have been alive since, the angels were created, have been following us and our family for years and years, and are able to, have, all access to information that most people wouldn't know about us or our family, right? Yeah. So for them to come along and masquerade as, grandma so-and-so or uncle so-and-so and dupe us into trusting these spirits, well, to what end? Well, ultimately to deceive us into following a satanic path.
Now, I mean, kind of speculate a bit more, but what do you think? Why do you think certain people are kind of drawn in by that? Whenever they're just kind of drawn in by the idea of a spirit guide, a helpful partner that can give me, I don't know, insider information or something like that. Why is that so attractive?
I think that this brings us back to the topic at hand, which is conspiracies, right? Conspiracies are fun, but more importantly, conspiracies appeal to the base desire for having information that somebody else doesn't have. Like this is the basis of Gnosticism, right? Yeah. Secret knowledge. I've got secret knowledge, and therefore I'm in the know. You're not. You're the dummy. And I'm the one that really has, an understanding of things. And so, people latch on to conspiracies. They latch on to QAnon. They latch on to these sort of things. And they want to gain information from the beyond. And so they open themselves up to demonic influences because they want secret knowledge that nobody else has, but these spirits do. Right, or they want special power to accomplish, the ancestral work to be able to, get justice or, get our way. So I think that, we're quick to jump on, these unknown things. If there's a promise that it will, give us an upper hand in whatever it is that we want to try to accomplish.
Yeah, and I've seen several accounts in, recent kind of like demon possession and that kind of stuff where the spirit started off as a helpful guide.
Yes.
But then over time started demanding darker things or demanding things, and when they didn't get their way, started like a poltergeist pestering and even physically abusing or mentally abusing the person. And so it just drove that person nuts. Several accounts of these kinds of either demon possession or demon oppression.
Yes.
And so that's where we're trying to let you, viewer, if you're a Christian, to understand that number one, these entities are real, very real. Even though you just can't see them, they are real. And some of the clearest accounts of the demon possession we have, obviously, where Jesus was casting out demons in the New Testament, in the Gospels, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus, perfect person, the God-man, in the trustful accounts of the Gospels, we can see that there were demon possession accounts. And we see that those are real. And they're nothing to trifle with. And so if you ever hear of somebody who is saying, oh, I saw my grandma and I talk to them regularly now and that kind of stuff, beware. There is definitely no account of an angel who was not cast out of heaven, no account of an angel of that nature maintaining a communicable relationship with a human. But what we do have are certain accounts of fallen angels or demons possessing people and injuring them or manipulating them or lying to them and guiding them towards darkness. That's what we do have. And so when you come across people who are trying to conjure spirits, you better believe that the prince and power of the air of this earth, Satan, he is ready. He is seeking those whom he may devour.
Yes.
And so he is ready and at the helm and just waiting for people to conjure and thinking that they're conjuring up the deceased. What do we read in the scriptures? It's appointed for man to die once and then the judgment.
Yes.
You don't roam the earth. This is not biblical. You do not roam the earth. There is no spirit to conjure up. You're going to get something else. And it's going to be a fallen angel. So beware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would encourage any Christian who is engaging in these conjuring spells. You might be doing it because you think that this is helping, to right inequitable wrongs. But listen, there's better ways to do that without engaging in conjuring rituals. Maybe you're on the right and you think that taking part in QAnon, is going to help to establish, more conservatism here in America. But listen, this organization is actually directing you away from the Great Commission and to just, conservatism with what at this point are nothing more than unfounded accusations that don't have enough evidence for it to be taken to court. So just be careful with all that. Be careful with the conspiracies about, the Satanists are out on Halloween trying to kidnap kids and these sorts of things. It's like before we, take part in these things, before we repeat these things and echo these things, we have to make sure that, is there enough evidence to make these claims? Is there enough evidence to engage in this? And is it biblical enough that we should be taking part in these things? Listen, we should be invested in preaching the gospel, not following breadcrumbs put out there by anonymous sources. And at the end of the day, we should be asking the question, well, so what, right? And not that I don't care about these things. Of course I care about racial justice. Of course I care about, if there's pedophiles eating babies, and these sorts of things. I care about these things. But listen, what can I do about it? What can I actually do about it? And isn't the greatest work I can do is preach the gospel message and lead unbelievers to Jesus Christ? Listen, what if 9/11 was an inside job? What if it was? What are you going to do? You can't reverse time. You can't bring the lives back of those that were lost. What if the world is flat? I have a hard time even saying that with a straight face. But what if it is? What if it is? What if NASA is using composite, Photoshop to dupe us into believing in a spherical planet, right? I was at a restaurant one day and I had a NASA shirt on, and a girl actually came up to me and began to evangelize me on the flat Earth. Yes. She had a tract. She gave me a tract, and tried to convince me that the Earth is flat, and I, just. It's like, what if it is, right? Yeah. What if it is? What does that change about anything? Does not Jesus still command us to go and preach the Great Commission? How does this conspiracy alter my path? Because if it takes me away from accomplishing the Great Commission of Jesus Christ, then it is not of the Lord. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, either you gather with me or you scatter against, right? Well, what if Hillary Clinton and John Podesta are actually cannibals, right? How does this change the Great Commission of Jesus Christ? We can pray that if they are, they get caught, punished, prosecuted, all that, right? But what does knowing this information actually do for me as a Christian? Is it helping me to have a fire to go preach the gospel? Because if it's not, it's nothing that's helping me. So as Christians, listen, rather than getting caught up in all these conspiracy theories, I just bring you back to, we have a great commission. We have our orders. We have our direction. And it's not to say don't study conspiracies. Clearly, I study conspiracies. I know enough about it to have this conversation, right? So I've spent some time on this, but to what end? Well, to equip the church to not get duped into wasting the rest of their life on something that at the end of the day, Q comes out and reveals that he was nobody and just some kid making up stuff online, right? I mean, as far as we know, that's all it is. Until you come out of the shadows and say, here's who I am, here's my position in the government, and here's the evidence that we're going to use to prosecute this person. Until all that goes down, all it is just rumors. So why get so caught up in it that this becomes our goal, this becomes our life? No, the Great Commission of Jesus Christ is our calling, and that's what we need to focus on.
Yep. Bam. Boom.
I would drop the mic, but we can't afford new ones. So
nice. Yes, that is, again, very good word, but it also fits in line with our mission here at Studio 118. We are calling people to think clearly about these tough topics, and so that you can go ahead and have these good conversations with the people around you and defend it from a biblical standpoint, from a biblical worldview. So if you're out there and maybe it's the first time you've heard of such conspiracy theories,
and if you are Q,
yes. Please call us right now. If this is the first time that you've been hearing of such conspiracy, you're like, I don't know what's going on. Well, either way, this is a good exposure because, as we were talking about, this is starting to affect the church. This is starting to come in, and people are starting to have conversations, and we want to help Christians to engage in that conversation, but do it in such a way that is honest and that it reflects our Savior well. We don't want to be accusers, false accusers. Now, maybe you already know more than what we're talking about today. Maybe you're steeped in it. And for you, I would just encourage you, again, just listen to the biblical admonitions that we were sharing about bearing false witness and making sure we're prioritizing our time to keep the main thing. We've been commissioned to spread the gospel, to make disciples, and not only that, but also to examine our own hearts, to examine whether we are of the faith, and continue to walk out our faith with fear and trembling. And we will be judged by our idle words and our idle speech and our idle behavior.
Oh, that just sends shivers, man. So many idle words.
So let's be aware of that. And don't let this condemn you. Don't let this disparage you, but let it kind of awaken us to reorient our priorities, reorient ourselves back into spending time in God's Word and having those fruitful conversations and hopefully pulling people who are maybe so far deep and maybe they're caught up in that. Maybe you know somebody like that, so hopefully you can share some encouraging words with them. Well, with that, guys, that concludes our discussion portion. We just so you guys know, if you're watching us on Austin Cable Access Channel 11, we have about 8 minutes left with you guys before our stream stops. And I want to let you know right here that you can jump onto our YouTube live stream. We're still going to carry that on because we're going to start our Q&A portion. And so if you would like to partake in that discussion, jump onto the YouTube live stream. You can find us on youtube.com/Calvary South Austin. And there'll be a live stream ready for you. Now, if you want to submit your questions, we already got a few in the queue. If you want to submit your questions, feel free to do that on the live chat, or you can email it at outreach@calvarysouthaustin.com, or again, you can call in your question at 512-576-5433. That's 512-576-5433. Now, let us commence our Q&A portion here. Let's see what we got. All right, so let's see. First one is saying, isn't there some scripture in the Bible that speaks about the purity of blood and the importance of blood, that would provide some evidence and importance for these sexual and non-sexual rituals like Crowley's that might be happening in Hollywood or political underbelly, and they do so for power, influence, success, fame, or even supernatural health or youth. A lot of stuff there, but...
Yeah, so I take the question to be, can you really, receive, rejuvenated youth from adrenochrome? Right, that's basically the question here.
But is it biblically based?
Right. Leviticus 17 tells us that the life is in the flesh. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar. Right. So, does this prove that adrenochrome can, give you rejuvenation of youth? Is adrenochrome in the blood able to give you longer,
longevity
life?
of life,
Yeah, exactly. And I would just point to Hillary Clinton, right? If she's eating babies for the adrenochrome because it gives you a more youthful appearance and a longer life, it ain't working. It just ain't working.
I heard she's 118 though.
Well, if she's 200 years old, then she looks great. She doesn't look a day older than 100.
Nice.
But I just the life is in the blood, meaning that if you bleed out, you're dead.
Isn't that verse tied to? Isn't that verse tied to warning about do not murder?
Yes.
Because
yes.
The life.
And it's about eating blood, right? So
Gotcha.
kosher preparation is the draining of all the blood. Basically, all it's saying is that the life of a person or an animal is in the blood, because without blood, you dead, right?
Yeah.
So,
but also, a lot of these commandments about these rituals, these ceremonies, were tied because. Were administered because of the pagan nations partaking in them. They
Sure.
were the ones doing child sacrifice and drinking of the blood. And in a way, because we are God image bearers,
yes,
it is an affront when you do these things.
And then there's also a level of blood guiltiness that comes upon a society that murders babies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a huge warning for America. After we've basically aborted as many babies as we've aborted since Roe v. Wade, I mean the blood guilt of America is huge, and God is not going to be mocked, right?
Yeah.
So, there is an account that is going to be paid
Mm-hmm.
on this country, and it'll be at the hand of the Lord. But the question, can somebody be accountable and from the consuming of blood? So there's this whole spirit cooking thing, and this lady engages in using all kinds of blood and semen always to cook foods, and it's just gross. It's just so it's one of these people that you look at her and you're just kind of like, yeah, there probably are some Satanists that are pedophiles and eating kids. That's very possible. This lady is one of those that is just like, there's seems to be a little evidence in that direction, right?
Yeah.
But the belief that these adrenochromes, that I guess are harvested from blood, maybe from the blood of a child being tortured or something to that effect, does it give you a longer life? I have a hard time believing that.
Yes.
I have a hard time believing it. Do people believe it and engage in this?
No doubt.
I've heard it's happening. I haven't seen enough evidence for me to say, yeah, this is most certainly happening, right? Mm-hmm. So is the claim a conspiracy, or is this actually happening? And until I see actual evidence, all we have at this point are rumors and accusations. I'd be more than willing to see the evidence.
Yeah.
But if we do have that kind of evidence, let's arrest, prosecute, and punish, the guilty party.
But as far as, does the Bible support such a view? not in context.
I don't see it. When it talks about the blood of Jesus Christ, sets us free from sin, it's not the literal blood, like you see at the end of Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, a lady come up and sop up all the blood, that came out of Jesus' heart, right? And there's a mystical belief about this, that there's something about the blood itself, and it's just kind of like, no, it's not. It is the blood of Jesus Christ, and it was a perfect blood that was shed for our sins, but it's not the material of the blood itself, but the shedding of the life that is important for us. So making a big deal about the blood is just kind of like, if you're Jewish, then make sure you're eating kosher, but other than that,
no long life. Sorry,
I don't see this. I don't see a basis for this, except just maybe in some sort of satanic spiritist style belief of Crowleyism or something like that, where they attribute more power to blood itself than
or Ozzy Osbourne.
Biting
pigeons.
Yeah.
All right.
Flying high again.
Well, right before we get to our next question, we want to bid adieu to the people on Channel 11. We're going to switch over. Well, we're going to stay on YouTube live stream, but we're going to say goodbye to the people on Channel 11. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you on the flip side. All right, we're back on YouTube. Thank you guys for holding out. Again, send in your questions on the YouTube live chat. We are specifically on YouTube, or solely on YouTube right now. Keep sending in your questions or email them if you need any clarification about the things we're talking about. Let's have that discussion. Let's jump into our next question here, which is kind of related to where we're talking about the Black Lives Matter organization. I guess this one's not entirely related to Halloween or anything, but really just more of a, I guess, expecting a kind of a pastoral answer here. But what is the best way to explain that the Black Lives Matter organization doesn't really care about Black lives? So controversial, loaded.
It's a loaded question there.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could come right out and say the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't care about Black lives. I don't know that I would say it's at the top of their list. It seems like they've taken in. I forget the amount of money, but I think it's it's definitely millions.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars at least have been, given to this organization. I haven't yet heard about how they're pouring that money into impoverished minority neighborhoods. That would be like a clear evidence to me that there is a true level of care.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if that's a conversation that you want to have with somebody and at least ask the question, what is, besides rioting, besides, protesting, besides, taking the stand that they're taking, what are they doing with the millions and millions of dollars that they've collected for this movement? What are they actually doing with that money? If they took that money and started pouring it into minority neighborhoods that definitely need a leg up, then to me that would be a clear sign, that they're really in it for the community, right? What I don't want to hear though is a millionaire basketball player, who moved out of the neighborhood he grew up in and now preach at me about my white privilege. It's just kind of like, I'm kind of poor.
Yeah.
I do not live in a gated community, right? So, when I see organizations like BLM taking a bunch of money and then not pouring it back into the community they claim to support, it does lend itself to the belief that maybe they don't care about the very people that they're getting wealthy from, right? So if I were to have this conversation, if somebody were to sit down with me and say, Black Lives Matter really cares about the people that they're supporting, I would just ask, well, how are they using the money to do that?
Mm-hmm.
How are they taking the millions and millions of dollars and supporting the Black community?
Yeah. I would approach it this way, where there's no doubt that they obviously care about the people that are dying.
Right.
They're going out to the streets. Not many people I mean, if you care really about somebody, you're going to take a stand and go and shout it to the street that there was an injustice that occurred, right? So obviously, there's an amount of care happening. What I would probably want to concentrate on is this, okay, well, if you're talking about the specific organization, let's go look at their About Us page, right? And now, recently, I know it was updated.
They've changed it.
There were some controversial claims in there, but it was not only just about Black lives, but it was this slew of interests about, and one that, again, the co-founders have been on record as saying they're trained Marxists, and so some of those beliefs came into their About Us page, and talking about the destruction of the patriarchy and the nuclear family and that kind of stuff. And those seems to be priorities, obviously, if they made it to the webpage. Now, unfortunately, the website has been updated recently, probably within the last week or two. But I'm sure there's an archive of it somewhere. And you can see what are their actual priorities, what are their actual focus, what are they focused on in terms of how they're going to change the culture, how they're going to change the community, what do they want to focus on? And it seems to me there's a lot of extraneous things that are totally unrelated. So I obviously can't say that they don't care. Obviously they're out on the street, they truly believe that there was an injustice that happened, but in terms of what's the best way to now address the situation, am I going to yoke myself to an organization that has all this different agenda? I don't think that's wise. So that's the way I would approach that.
Yep. Good stuff.
All right. Let's see. Another question here. With all the things happening in the world, all the things,
all of it,
every event, how much serious thought should be invested in QAnon's perspectives of what is taking place? So I think we touched a little bit on that in terms of like priority. Just a little. Essentially, it's like how much time can I invest that is going to be wise, right?
I mean, I've invested some time.
We need specific numbers.
Yes, 20 hours a day.
20, okay.
So, it's difficult because, to say, because of all the things happening in the world today, well, that's a whole lot of stuff, right? And how much thought should be invested in QAnon's perspectives. Well, geez, I mean, this is a conspiracy that includes, so many conspiracies. So which rabbit hole do you want to go down, and how much time do you want to spend on it? It's just, it's endless, right? I think I mentioned JFK, but earlier I meant JFK Jr., right? So I think there was some sort of prophecy that JFK Jr. was supposed to come back on July 4th last year. It's like, nice. But then they're quick to admit that, well, there's disinformation too that we're putting out there, because that's got to be a part of it, right? Okay, so yeah, the Q drops that you interpret to mean one thing that don't come to pass, you have to sign off as being, purposefully deceptive, right? Like you're in a jihad or something, right? So how much time do you want to invest on a group that remains anonymous, doesn't put forth clear evidence for their claims, and tells you that they're also putting out misinformation, to confuse the uninitiated? I don't know. I mean, how much time do you want to invest in this, right?
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't seem like a good way to spend time, especially knowing that even if you figure everything out about QAnon and all the conspiracies, what does that do to help somebody come to Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
And that really is what I would say is, if you can invest your time in examining, the QAnon or any other conspiracy out there, and it helps you lead people to Jesus, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah, because there, again, as time passes, there's going to be another issue, the issue of the day, right? And that's where I'm of the opinion that as you take advantage of those cultural moments, like what we're doing right now, because we put time and effort into researching these topics so that we can go and disseminate information and help other Christians to use that in their conversations. But probably after this, I mean, I'm aware of it, but I'm not going to go and spend
I'm going to spend a lot more time on this.
But I think it's helpful to be aware of these things,
Sure.
especially if that's your personality where you like having these conversations. It's good to have your finger on the pulse of the culture so that you can go and have intelligent conversations with your neighbors, right, and your coworkers. And so if they bring up false information, you say, actually, no. And let's talk about real, truthful information, and then find a way to lead that into the gospel message, right? Yeah. So it's good to be aware of culture, and but after the moment has passed, I don't think it's really worth it.
I had a long conversation with somebody recently about masks, right? And personally, I don't buy the mask thing. I've heard too many different stories that the mask is for the person who's sick, or the mask is for the person who's not sick. The mask is better than a vaccine. And the mask won't help a person, a healthy person shouldn't wear a mask. You've heard just everything, right? So I think that the people who think that masks will help them should feel comfortable wearing a mask, and the people who think it's bogus, should be free to not wear a mask. We don't need a nanny government to, help us to protect ourselves from ourselves. But okay. Having said that, I know several people who are so anti-masker that is their lead-off conversation in every situation at this point in the history of America, right? It's like if you say hi to this person, they're about to tell you why masks are wrong and why it's COVID's a hoax, and and it's just kind of like I got into a conversation with this person of, listen, if somebody feels comfortable wearing a mask and was willing to come to church with that mask on, we should make sure that they feel comfortable while they're here, because the point is that I'd like to teach this person the Bible regardless of what they have on their face or not, right? But this person's chasing people out the door trying to tell them that nobody should ever wear a mask ever again, It's like, well, what about Halloween? Maybe I've got a nice Donald Trump mask that I want to wear, but but the point that I'm trying to make is this, that he's so caught up in this conspiracy of COVID is a hoax. Masks are, the next step in the mark of the beast, and he's trying to convince everybody of this. And I just simply asked him, how is this helping you to lead an unbeliever to Jesus? Because it's not, the person who has a mask on has been convinced that this is helping them, right? So you're going to lead off with, you're an idiot, stop wearing your mask? Oh, and then let me tell you about Jesus too. It doesn't make sense. And I tried to help the person understand that there's no point in, and you're actually cutting your legs out from underneath you by arguing about masks with a person that is wearing a mask who obviously thinks that it's important to wear a mask. You basically have ruined your testimony by focusing on this controversial topic, realizing that the gospel's already controversial. Yeah. So why compound the problem? Why not try to remove barriers, knowing that as you present the gospel, it's already going to be an offense. So why offend them with conspiracy theories when we're trying to get them to the truth of Jesus Christ? Yeah. So hopefully that provides the question.
Yeah, you don't want to become a stumbling block, essentially. Right? I mean, the gospel is already called the stench of death.
And we want to make the path straight for their feet as we lead them to Jesus Christ. We don't want to put stumbling blocks of every conspiracy that we've ever embraced in front of them. Now, if they're asking, if somebody comes along and is like, well, what do you think about masks? Then I'm happy to engage in the conversation with somebody. But to lead off with conspiracy, and then hopefully bring it around to Jesus Christ, it just doesn't make sense.
Yep. Good stuff. So hopefully that helps you guys out there. Let's get to our next question here about, this is an interesting, I don't know what this is about, but we'll see if any of us can put it together. What about predictive programming adrenochrome is taken from kids that are tortured, or so they say? This is similar to the Disney film Monsters, Inc. Disney is also based around magic and... I'm sorry. We need some better punctuation here. Disney is also...
Did Jeremy type this?
Yes, I think he did. No, he did. He spoke it.
He English good, but he math bad.
All right. I don't know what this question is asking. aside from the tie about Disney films and Monsters Inc. and being based around like Fantasia, being based around obviously magic and witchcraft and stuff like that. I don't know about the
and dancing hippos.
Yes, and dancing hippos.
You gotta love the dancing hippos.
Well, yeah, I don't know. The Disney stuff, at least. I mean, I'm a father of a 4.5-year-old, and I've seen some of the Disney. Even growing up, I remember Disney stuff being an issue. I don't know enough about, is there a conspiracy where they're putting perverted images kind of coded into their animation frames and stuff like that? I've seen screenshots and stuff like that. I don't know. Again, going back to our perspective on like the QAnon stuff, possible, maybe. Am I for certain? Of course not. I don't know. But how much time am I going to spend looking into that? I don't have the time. I mean, my kid's not going to notice it. Why do I care, right? But obviously, I would go as a parent. I would definitely let other parents know, of course, that whatever you are exposing your children to, if there are images that are, every kid's going to be different, but there are images that are obviously going against, biblical teachings and stuff like that, then obviously that's a hard no. Culture has changed so much up until this point that a lot of things that were taboo way back when are just par for the course today. And so there's a lot of things that I think that kids get exposed to, even within these like Disney or Pixar. A lot of these movies, animated movies now, are kind of geared towards the adults as well, where they put a lot of innuendos. So it's not just the visual aspect, but
which has always been the case. Really, I mean, when you go back to early cartoons, I mean,
right.
There's a lot there.
Yes. So just as a warning, if you're worried about like the Disney stuff or even like the Harry Potter stuff and that kind of stuff, so each kid's going to be different. So take that into account. But then obviously, this is something you need to be prayerful about. How are you going to lead your children? How are you going to lead your family? And what are you going to expose them to? What is right? And if there's any question, obviously seek out the counsel of your fellowship, people that are wise about these situations, and ask them, and just prayerfully consider what you should do for your family.
It gets into two different conversations that I can engage in on this one, because is there predictive programming happening through Disney and everything that Disney owns, which is everything. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I've seen enough of the subliminal imagery in many of these, cartoons and whatnot, that that there does seem to be, at least, being that I was a professional artist. And as an artist for the Austin Chronicle, and I had my own rag, and I did flyer art, and I put blatant stuff on some of these flyers, but then when I had to tone it back, I would do subliminal stuff in the imagery. And so not that I really had a nefarious plan to alter somebody's mind, but it was just fun. So I can imagine that there's people down at Disney who are just having fun, just inserting stuff that they think is hilarious, that most people won't catch. Is it possible that it's more nefarious than that? That Disney is actually and other organizations like Disney are attempting to insert information that will change the mind of America? I could see that. I could see that being very possible, very possible. But then this gets into the question of, number one, conviction. And then a second topic, which is, do you raise your kids based in isolation or insulation, right? So conviction is that, if a parent is just kind of like, I don't think my kid's going to be brainwashed by this, and I've got a conviction that they can watch a cartoon and not be programmed, in the way that some people suggest is going to happen. That is a conviction. Is it a good conviction? Is it based in science, or is the other decision to keep your kids from it based in science? I don't know. I've never really done the research on that, But then comes the question of insulation versus isolation, right? So there's the one theory of isolating your kids, from the world, isolating them from the influence of an organization like a Disney or these sorts of things, right? You can just completely isolate them from the world. And keep them from being negatively impacted by any of these things, right? But then there's the insulation side of it, which is, introduce this stuff to your kids, sit down and talk with them, and teach them how to make sense of these things, right? I think Christian parents, have the right to choose either of those paths, and both come with problems.
Trade-offs, yeah.
Right, so the isolation, kids eventually find out that there's, other things out there in the world that their parents didn't introduce them to, and they might, then be upset with mom and dad because it was withheld for them for so long, and so they go off to college and they just flip out and go, explore everything, right? So that's a potential on the isolation side. On the insulation side, there's the potential that, as you introduce them to things, and ideas, and maybe some of this programming, that in your attempt to insulate them through helping them to think through these things, they're actually being programmed in the process. And so either way you go, there's potential risks, right? So at the end of the day, parents need to be prayerful.
Yeah.
Parents need to be prayerful, and they need to consider, like I had a buddy of mine who's about to help us start the school here at Calvary South Austin. He had a little girl come to him. He's working at a elementary school in Bay. It doesn't matter where, but. So one of the children came and was struggling, with a lesson, and as he was talking with her, she basically said that she had nightmares all night because mom had been watching It, right? And so here's a little girl who, is up with nightmares all night long, because mom didn't have the sense enough to not allow her little, 5-year-old daughter to, basically catch glimpses of this movie that, it's pretty, demonic and satanic.
Yeah.
So, is there predictive programming being produced by major conglomerates like Disney? I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised. I just think, that stuff has always been around. We were raised on it. If you go back and watch Looney Tunes that I grew up with, there were things that I laughed at watching Looney Tunes as a child. And I laugh at different things now as an adult, right? There's different jokes that I get now as an adult that I didn't get when I was a kid, right? Did my little brain pick up on that stuff as a child? I don't think so. I think it just went right over the head, Mm-hmm. So with that, I think I've exhausted that.
All right. Let's see. Is it a conspiracy to call Christians who shake and laugh around and call it the Holy Spirit? Some people call it the Kundalini spirit. This seems like an old school movement, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the Holy Laughter movement, and it's kind of tied around Rodney Howard-Browne and getting drunk in the spirit. And I guess this movement has continued to exist in some hyper-charismatic churches. And videos have been done comparing the Holy Laughter movement to the Kundalini spirit that is found in Eastern, mysticism and those sorts of religious systems. I don't know that I would call it a conspiracy. Right, because we know that there are churches engaging in holy laughter. We know that this is very similar to the Kundalini, the Kundalini spirit that causes those who embrace, that religious system to also bark and laugh and shake and these sorts of things. So is it a conspiracy to say that? That this is coming from the same demonic entity, right? I wouldn't call that a conspiracy. I would just call that good doctrine. I would just say that, that there's nowhere in the scriptures that would lead us to believe that the Holy Spirit is going to cause us to act uncontrollably, right? As a matter of fact, one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control, Galatians chapter 5. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy. I would just say it's discerning the spirits.
Not barren.
Testing the spirits, discerning the spirits.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is not the Holy Spirit, so it's got to be something else. Therefore, it's not a stretch to say that this is the same sort of spirit as the Kundalini spirit. Yeah.
All right. Well put. All right. Let's see. We got one more question here about. I was wondering about this guy Jonathan Cahn, and if he's someone or I'm guessing Christians should listen to, since he's all about Bible prophecy and this weird Hebrew prayer he does. Is that really biblical or a scam? I've only ever heard of Jonathan Cahn. I think he has a book called The Harbinger, and then there's a follow-up, The Harbinger 2, Back with a Vengeance, or something. I'm just kidding.
Electric Boogaloo?
Yes. But I've known people who are familiar, and they've read the books, and they really do see this person as an influential person and a prophetic voice, if you will, that kind of stuff. I don't know how much exposure you've had.
I'm not a fan. Not that I would discourage anybody from reading Jonathan Cahn. But I find him to be someone who takes Old Testament prophecies out of their context and tries to apply it to the church in a way that I don't necessarily agree with, and then he makes a lot to do about some very he takes a lot of symbolism. And then, basically tries to show you how it applies to America, and this mountain, and that tree, and that thing, and he does a lot of this. This represents that, and this represents that, and that's why this is, applicable to the American church and the American nation, right? And I just think that's dangerous. So we have to interpret the Bible contextually. That is grammatically and historically contextual. Prophecies in the Old Testament were given to a specific people for a specific time, and while there could be, there's partial fulfillments and complete fulfillments and these sorts of things, right? So I get all of that, but I just think that he goes about it in a very, I think, unbiblical way.
There's a lot of hoops that you got to jump through to, or assumptions made.
I would say that he's basically shoehorning America into Old Testament prophecy in a way that I would never do personally. Gotcha. So could he be right? He could be. So I don't mean to just say, the guy's completely wrong and it's never going to happen that way, right? I do believe he's been wrong enough for me to feel confident in my own position on his approach at biblical interpretation. And I just find him to be a guy that is really shoehorning the church and America into Old Testament Bible prophecy about Israel. Yeah. And he's Jewish, right? But he kind of almost, he broaches the line of replacement theology.
Which is, for our viewers...
Yeah, so replacement theology is that the church has replaced Israel. But he kind of almost does it in a way of, and it's been a while since I've read his stuff. So, sure. But from my recollection, it just kind of seems like he wants to apply America to Israel.
Gotcha.
So I don't think he's teaching replacement theology. So I'm not accusing him of that. I'm just saying he's encroaching.
Yeah.
And he's going about a form of biblical interpretation that, from my point of view, is kind of toying with almost a replacement theology, but nation for nation rather than church for Israel.
Yeah, so, again, whoever asked this question, but with any of these topics, right, if there's somebody in your life who you see that is taking part in this and you're interested, how do I reach out to them? That's where, what we were talking about earlier, where get familiar with some of that literature, get familiar with some of those teachings, and then that way you can go and have a thoughtful conversation with that person. And so hopefully this little bit of summary gets you started, but if you want to have a more in-depth conversation with whomever you're concerned about, maybe go read the book and just see, what is this all about? Or just get a high-level summary, and that way you can just ask questions to get to know what exactly do they get from Jonathan Cahn or other such topics.
You missed one about Senate Senate Bill 145 there.
Yes.
Did you mean to skip over that one?
You can, if you want to tackle it.
Do it.
All right, let's do it. Here we go. Peer pressure at its finest, guys. All right.
You can do it.
Let's see. So, do you understand?
Everybody's doing it.
So this is a. Do you understand how easy it is for Christians to get confused when politicians like Nancy Pelosi's nephew, Ronald Pelosi, pushes through legislation like Senate Bill 145, which makes it possible, which makes child molestation possible with a 14-year-old boy or girl in a certain style without having to register? Do you understand how easy it is for Christians to get confused when stuff like that happens?
I understand how Christians get confused.
Yes, in general. I mean, we're human beings.
Just in general, right? Yeah. So if I'm grasping the question apart from that first sentence of the greater question, right? I think he's asking, should Christians understand what's going on there in California, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've talked about this. Yeah. We've talked about what it's actually saying, what it's not saying. Yeah. I've heard, pundits, making more about it than it actually is. Though we both agree it's a bad bill. Mm-hmm. It's a horrible bill, right? But it is based on a level of precedent there in California. Yeah. You want to explain?
So my understanding is that there is currently the way molestation and especially like statutory rape laws are set up in California is that for a heterosexual situation, so let's say a male engaging in underage sex with a boy basically, if there's a certain age gap, which is like less than 10 years, that the molester, the rapist, will not get the sex offender title pushed on their name or registered for their name for their entire life. Because the thinking is, well, they're so young, you're basically going to ruin their entire life with this sex offender title. Yeah. So the law, as it stands, is that for a certain age, and then the age gap between the person they raped will kind of get them a get-out-of-jail-free card in terms of don't have that sex offender title. So then this new bill that was introduced, now they saw the loophole there, and this is my understanding is just this is the way it was defended, is because they saw a loophole, and now they want to use that to support, or not support, but basically defend the homosexual right. aspect of it. So now if there's homosexual pederasty going on, that homosexual rapist will not get the sex offender title slapped on their name for the rest of their life. And my understanding, so when we were talking about this, I was like, so the thinking is rather than tightening the loophole or doing away with it, yeah. or finding a smarter way to fix the wording of the law, we want to just go and say, well, they did it over here in this situation, so therefore let's do it in our situation. And it just screamed ugliness and weirdness.
I think on the one side, those who jumped on this and are just kind of like, oh, they're legalizing pedophilia, and again, we got to be careful with all of this, because the reality is that there's already a law, as Reuben has pointed out on the record, that, and the idea is that, okay, let's say a couple, starts dating in high school, so a senior starts dating a junior or let's say a freshman, like a senior's dating a freshman in high school, and then he goes off to college, and they continue their relationship, and they're engaging in, premarital fornication, because that's the way of the world, and, eventually dad catches him with his daughter, and says, well, you're, 20 and she's, 16 and she's still underage, and I'm going to press charges, and you're going to get stuck with this, pedophile label for the rest of your life, though the relationship started when they were both minors, right? Mm-hmm. So the law in California is that, well, we're not going to do that to this kid, right? We're not going to, label him a pedophile for the rest of their life because they had a young romantic relationship in high school that continued on as he went to college, right? So that's been on the record. That's been on the books, right? Now we're just seeing the homosexual side of it saying, well, if that's okay for them, why isn't it okay for us as well? And it's a valid argument. It's a valid argument, though I just think it's the wrong direction. Someone should have stood up and just said, well, okay, hold on a second. Let's rethink this whole thing based on your argument. Why don't we just pull it all back and just say,
let's rethink this.
You know, if you're with a minor, you're a pedophile, and we're gonna go ahead and label you that, you know, for the rest of your life. So be on your P's and Q's, right? So I do think that there's Christians who are confused about it, and partially because I think that right-wing pundits jumped all over this, and instantly it's just kind of like they're passing through pedophilia, you know, legislation without really doing the research to realize that, you know, really these laws have already been on the books, just, you know, for one form of sexual fornication and not all forms, right? So it's really just advancing, it's just broadening who this applies to and what style of sex it applies to. Now it's all forms of intercourse between a person of a certain age and, you know, someone that's within 10 years of that limit. I think it's all horrible.
Yes.
I think it all needs to get shut down. I think that all these laws need to be taken off the books, and kids need to be told to wait till marriage. But that's just, you know, that's the ultra conservative Christian position, you know, that, you know, sex is for a married couple, and that's what we ought to be encouraging. But
yeah, that brings up the two things. Number one, Christians who depend on legislation to be the savior. Like, think, for instance, even like abortion, right?
Yeah.
Where a lot of Christians really believe if we can just get the right laws passed,
right,
and we're inching away at it, we're eating away at it, we're all for passing smart legislation. If whatever we can do legislatively, awesome, but that shouldn't be the end-all be-all. That shouldn't be our goal. Rather, the transformative message of the gospel to those hurting mothers, or even the mothers that are doing it with bad intentions, transforming their hearts with the gospel message so that they won't go through with it. It's a grassroots effort there.
You've got the liberal Christian who will say, well, you can't legislate morality. And it's just like, well, all legislation is moral. Like every single law that's passed has a moral aspect to it, right? You know, so yeah, we legislate morality all day long. That's all legislation is about, is morality, right? What's right and what's wrong. So, you know, the liberal who says, well, you can't go around legislating morality. Yes, yeah, that's all we do. But then the other side of that is the thought that, like what you're saying, is that if we legislate all the right things, if we can just legislate the 10 Commandments, then it fixes America. No, it just means that a bunch of people are going to be breaking a bunch of laws, right? Because the only way that we're going to get fixed is, you know, through the transformation power of the Holy Spirit. So that goes back to the QAnon idea that, well, we're all basically good, but there's this evil entity in the government that's making us fight each other. It's making us, fight racially and economically and all. If we can just get this evil entity out, then America will calm down and we'll be good people again. Yeah. No, that ain't gonna happen. You know, there are none that are good, and the only way that we can be turned into good people is by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and you know, the second point I was going to bring up is, as Christians, in keeping in line with what we're trying to do here with Studio 118 about being theologically smart and culturally smart, is, there's a lot of Christians who just are not aware of how to talk about issues like sex. Right? And how should a Christian think about that? And so when they see, well, it's the law, so I don't have to worry about it. They just kind of like, they're passive about it, rather than actively thinking, I as a Christian, how am I going to orient my thoughts in my life in terms of, okay, if there's a law that goes against my Christian beliefs and what the Bible teaches, I'm going to go against that, obviously. Yeah. And so I think just a lot of Christians out there who just are passively living. And I was reading an interesting thing about how the millennial generation, as well as Gen Z, the youngest ones, they're the most social justice oriented. They're very consciously aware about all these cultural things that are happening, but yet they're probably the most biblically illiterate.
Yes.
And they would rather seek out social justice for the sake of whatever they think equity is, rather than going through the scriptures and figuring out how is God calling me to live and then how am I going to take that message to the world? So there is this big disconnect, and I'm really appealing to parents of youth. I'm a youth leader here at the church, and so I'm appealing to you, be aware. Be aware of what, number one, the schools that your kids are attending, whatever what messages they are getting there at school. And you better believe that there is indoctrination going on. You better believe that there are teachers with agendas who are trying to sneak in messages when they can. But just secondly, just be aware of how to approach certain subjects with your kids so that you can lead them in a biblical way, and they will be able to be smart about it and how they engage culture. All right, let's see.
Is it a conspiracy theory if it's true?
Well, I mean, on a very, very high level, yes, it still is. It still is. Well, let's see. How are we going to define these terms?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that question, right? It seems like a simple question, but it's not. Is it a conspiracy theory if it's true?
Until somebody figures out if it's true, it's going to remain a conspiracy theory.
You can have something that's true, but you don't know it's true, right?
Right.
So it's a bit of a loaded question.
Yep.
Because it excludes some important data, right? Is it a conspiracy theory if we have evidence of the truth of it? That's one question that we could turn this into, right?
Yeah.
If we have the evidence that something is factually true, that it corresponds to reality, it's not a conspiracy.
Right. At that point, it just becomes, this is a fact.
This is just
a
fact of the matter,
yes,
right?
It's been discovered. It's been out in the open now.
But there are things that are true, but we don't have factual evidence to actually know that it's true. Right, so this gets into three spheres of knowledge, right? There are the known knows, there are the known unknowns, and there are the unknown unknowns, right? So here's these three spheres of knowledge that, we all have to wrestle with. So if this question about truth is an unknown unknown, then your conspiracy is barely speculation.
Mm-hmm.
If the truth that we're talking about is in the sphere of the known unknowns, that we know something that we don't know, right? What keeps an atom together, right? Like we know the atom stays together, but what is the force that is keeping all atoms actually together, right? It's a known unknown. We know enough to know that we don't know what is binding the atom together, right? So is it a conspiracy if I start suggesting it's super glue, or it's it's Jesus, or
nice.
it's so the minute you start,
Jesus is there.
So the minute you start trying to offer up an explanation for the unknown, for the known unknown, then that becomes conspiratorial, right? Especially if it's Jesus working together with QAnon.
Yes.
But
White Anglo Jesus.
But then there's the known knows, the things that we know is just facts.
Yeah.
And if we know it's true, then it's not a conspiracy.
And a known unknown can become a known known,
right?
Provided there's evidence.
Yep.
Yep.
And the unknown unknown can become an unknown known, or a known unknown. Mana.
What I do know is that all your spheres of knowledge, they're actually flat.
But they're circular, so.
All right, let's see. One more question here. What is your take as far as people saying Christianity is based on astrology? That's a good one. What is your take as far as, is Christianity based on astrology? So this reminds me of the documentary that came out about, what was it called? About Christianity being based on these mystery religions.
Yeah, that was
Zeitgeist.
Zeitgeist.
There you go,
That's right.
Zeitgeist. So
That's right.
it's probably still on YouTube. And
it's a fun listen.
It is. It's got cool little background music, cool little animations. But Zeitgeist, it was Christianity based on these mystery religions from way back when that really did heavily depend on astrology. And I remember one saying that, well, the way this constellation lined up, this represents Mary. And as these stars are progressing through the sky during certain seasons, this represents her being pregnant. And as she comes out of the horizon, that represents the birth of Jesus. And you can see Leo the lion basically coming out of this constellation that represents Mary. A whole bunch of stuff like that. I remember doing research. I taught an apologetics class on this here at the church years ago. And when I did the research on this, it turns out that the researcher that put this Zeitgeist movie together and all these lines of thinking, the sources, number one, were either non-existent or they were highly untenable. So you really had to jump through a lot of hoops, make a lot of assumptions, and
most of them were late.
And yes, most of them did come after Christianity.
Right.
So the chain of influence was reversed here. And so there were so many problems with it that today there are Christ mythers that believe that Christ literally did not exist as a human, that he is simply a fabric or a figment of imagination from the early church, and they invented him to go against the Roman government and whatnot. And there's just no credible source for this. There's no credible evidence whatsoever. That's been thoroughly debunked in my eyes. So. And I don't spend time on it.
Yeah. And now we're done. So, I agree. The mystery religions appear to, at best, be taken from Christianity. Mm-hmm. With there being late sources, we see which influenced which, and Christianity influenced the mystery religions. At worst, we just have late material, and it actually predates Christianity. But then it's just as easy to say that the devil had some understanding of God's plan, because it's all spelled out in the Old Testament, through the prophetic promises, and it's just as possible, that the mystery religions were created before Christ came along, based on a satanic plan that was rooted in Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah, right? So either way you fall on it, the fact of the matter is that, number one, Jesus proved that he is God incarnate by rising up from the grave. How do we know this? Because this group of men went and died for that message, and people don't die for something that they know is a lie. Plain and simple. People don't go die for something that they know is a lie. People might die for a lie, but it's for them an unknown, right? They died for a conspiracy because they didn't know it was a conspiracy, right? Yeah. You do not die for something that you personally witnessed, or let me put that differently. You would be willing to die for this truth of the resurrection if you actually witnessed it, right? If you were there to witness it, and somebody said, you denied Jesus Christ as God incarnate, or else we're going to kill you. It's just kind of like, go ahead, knock me out, because, I know this is true. I saw it. This is why Paul converted to the Christian faith from Judaism. This is why the apostles who ran hiding on the night of Christ's arrest, went back out into the world within 40 days preaching the message of the resurrection. Now, how do they go from being scared cowards on the night of Jesus' arrest, running from him, and turn around in 40 days, they have the boldness to go back into the world, preaching the gospel, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, getting arrested again, getting beaten until they're all martyred for this message. What would possibly change their mind, except that they actually saw the thing that they preached, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ? So, all of that to say, do I think that the Christian message is based in astrology? I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time.
Just a little bit.
When you see the evidence of the Christian faith founded in the first century church, to think that, all of this was just, based in astrology and nothing more. Now we could reverse the question and say, do the stars declare the handiwork of God? Oh, sure, all day long.
Psalm 14, I think.
It is, here you have in the book of Job, he's actually referring to the stars, and he says, Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? Or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? I mean, he's referring to these star patterns. And biblically speaking, the Bible's very clear that the stars are placed where they are as a testimony to the greatness of God. Some have even gone in and taken the different signs and the different constellations and shown the gospel message revealed in the stars. So you could say that the gospel is to some degree maybe hidden in the stars, but is Christianity based on astrology? Absolutely not.
Yeah, so there's a difference between astrology and astronomy.
Yes, true, yes.
Right, so astrology goes further than astronomy and says, these stars are telling me a message about my life and my personality and the kind of person I am, blah, blah, blah.
And I meant to make that distinction that as we go from astronomy to astrology, which is where they are looking to for their messages, they're looking to the stars, right? So we can look to, astronomy and see the stars where they are and possibly see the hidden message of the gospel, in the stars, right? But should we turn around and look for, a new truth from the stars, or think that, the stars were predictive in the coming of the Messiah or these sorts of things? Nah. Yeah. I think that's all silly.
Yeah, personally, I'd rather practice gastronomy right now.
Wow.
Food? No? Not really?
Okay.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us, guys. This is Studio 118. Thank you for joining us. I hope it was a good conversation for you guys. Again, if you have any questions about what we talked about, feel free to email us at outreach@calvarysouth.austin.com. I'd love to see your questions. Again, we're here at Calvary South Austin. If you'd love to join us, we have our doors open for face-to-face fellowship. We meet on Sunday mornings at 9:15 a.m. and 11:15 a.m., and then also on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. We're taking the necessary safety measures to make sure people are obviously remaining safe during this season of COVID. So feel free to join us. If you have any questions about what we're doing, feel free to call the church, 512-576-5433. That's 512-576-5433. We'd love to hear from you. But other than that, I got nothing else. Thank you for joining us. This is Studio 118. We will see you next month. Later.